Testing 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me? Hikem, is that good?
Yes, I can.
Okay, give me the sign whenever you're ready. And I look at, which camera am I looking at? There's two. There's two of them. Okay, got it. And then during the discussion, do I look at that one? Look at that one, okay. I think you should turn the chair so I see her. Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us live and in person for day 2 of the National Democratic Institute's second Information Integrity Conference, DISICON. For our Zoom participants, you have translation in English, Albanian, and Serbian. Yesterday, we heard from a broad range of experts, journalists, and civil society members on the challenges faced by information disorders, not just here in Kosovo, but around the globe. Simply put, disinformation is a threat to democracy, and we all have a responsibility to combat it. With Kosovo's high internet penetration, disinformation travels rapidly across our social media. Our own personal biases and preferences make us believe false narratives, even though we're aware of the risk of disinformation. The goal of this two-day conference is to raise awareness of this threat to democracy and to build resiliency to counter it amongst Kosovo's citizens and the media. I want to thank once again USAID for its strong support for this conference. Welcome again, Albana Kursani, for joining us. And I hope you all have a chance to see our report on the media in the lead up to February 14th snap parliamentary elections. You can find it on NDI's website and our social media. We have an exciting day ahead of us today, so thanks again for joining. We have a panel on the role of journalists in political communications and a look at the coverage from the February 14th snap elections, 2 more DISI stories, and we'll hear from experts across the Balkans on their approaches to combating disinformation. So stay tuned with us throughout the day, and we'll run to about 4 hours, so please join us online, and welcome again for those of you in person. I'm delighted now to turn to our first discussion, and we are honored to be joined by a member of the European Parliament, Markéta Gregorova. She is a Czech activist and defender of human rights and an expert on combating disinformation. She will discuss the European Union's perspective on information integrity, challenges, foreign threats, and EU integration and reforms in the media and information industry. Thank you for joining us, all of you, and Markéta, the floor is yours.
Ah, wonderful. Now it works. I am very...
I think you're muted.
Yes, sorry, I could not unmute myself. The host did not allow it, so I'm very sorry for this. And I am happy to be here. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, we
can.
And
thank you for the invitation. Well, I would mostly leave it up to your questions or any questions that might come, but to just briefly introduce myself and how and why am I focusing on disinformation. As I was introduced, I am a member of the European Parliament. I was elected for the Czech Pirate Party, which, for those who are not familiar with pirate politics, we focus a lot on the future technologies, on digital agenda, artificial intelligence, etc. Well, hybrid threats such as disinformation actually fits in well with these topics. And in the European Parliament, apart from other things, I am currently also the coordinator for our group in INGE, which is a committee on hybrid threats, foreign interference, and disinformation. So that is also a place where I'm trying to push forward the agenda, potential EU legislation, because we do not have any in terms of disinformation and combating it. And well, I do hope that we are progressing quite well. And by the end of next year, we will hopefully have a report that we will be also able to present with our own views on how to tackle this issue. So that's about me, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we're delighted to have about 20 minutes to talk about what approaches the EU is having towards this threat of disinformation. Here in Kosovo, it's ripe for major political divisions, a lot of harsh language, divisive language, misogyny, and foreign influence. And part of this conference is to raise awareness of that, but also to learn how we might work with the parliament to raise awareness there and what the media should do. And just if you could give us a few minutes of lessons learned from how you've seen the EU combat this, what they should be doing, and ways that we might encourage people and civil society and government here in Kosovo to combat this growing threat.
Thank you for the question. Well, I think that apart from what the EU does, to have lessons learned for Kosovo, I also need to talk about what national parliaments can do, which is very important, because the EU actually has no mandate over, for example, critical thinking and schooling, education, media, savviness and stuff like that. So that is one part, the more long-term approach, but it's very important that the national parliaments should also focus on the education of citizens so that they are informed and know what they are facing, that not everything that is written or posted is true and reality. I think I'm talking about it, of course, it's boring. Everybody knows, that the long-term approach is most important, but I really want to talk about it because even if we created, all of us, best possible legislation in the world, without informed people who can critically evaluate the received information, it would be futile, and we would just have to probably ban everything, including the internet. So that's one thing. As for the EU itself and what it does, well, now it focuses a lot on, I'd say, two aspects. One of them is talking to the platforms, because without the social media platforms, there is no way that we can deal with this topic efficiently. And of course, the social media platforms are usually based somewhere else, somewhere abroad, and it is difficult, of course, to talk to them. That is why the Commission, in my opinion, is taking very good approach in trying to have voluntary codes of contact, and they are just asking nicely the corporations to do this and that. For example, to make political advertisement more transparent, or in general create safe designs so that the disinformation doesn't spread more quickly, fact-checking, cooperation with NGOs, so that the NGOs are really independent and competent, and how to check that. And I think that's a good approach, because we can kind of test like this, where is the border of the corporation to go into something voluntarily, and where they won't go into it voluntarily. Because later on, when we draft the legislation, we will already know where are the limits and what can we push for. And of course, we might push even more than what the voluntary limits are. However, it's good to know them, because there will be a lot of push against them. And the second approach is media, because the social media are, let's say, something that spreads the disinformation more quickly. But who actually creates it are often foreign subsidized media, such as Sputnik, if you've heard about, and other media that are somehow paid by foreign actors that are trying to intervene with our politics, and actually making these money flows transparent, actually knowing who is owning which media house, and making these people responsible for if they publish such disinformation and fact-check disinformation. That is a way that's really important. And this is kind of like a triangle, first tackling the transparency and money flow of the media, so that disinformation is not business. Then cooperating with the social media, so that this does not spread as a wildfire without any kind of checks and balances, but also that we protect the freedom of speech. And thirdly, educating the citizens so that they don't believe everything they see, just like that. So very briefly, it would be like that.
No, thank you very much. Let me just ask you as a follow-up, when you have voluntary codes of conduct needing a tipping point where they have to be enforced, are we there yet? And the volunteer working, where are you on that spectrum in Europe? And I think certainly in Kosovo, where the voluntary is not working. So it'd be helpful for us here in Kosovo to learn it. Where is Europe on that spectrum of voluntary versus mandatory?
Here is actually a point that I think that because we are in the European Union, which is like very strong economic bloc, we can actually have some influence over what the corporations are willing to do. And I think it's important we push them into it, so that even other countries that are not part of the EU can profit from that, because it will be something that's set up within the corporation itself already. So yeah, I understand you. As for how we are successful with such voluntary measures, I'd say that to some extent they are trying to cooperate. They are trying to share with us with what fact-checking NGOs they are cooperating. They are to some extent making some step in terms of transparency of algorithms and the political advertisement, even though there is long way ahead. But I do see progress. Why is that? It's because the corporations themselves, they do not actually want to have that much responsibility. You know, they were never created as some kind of societal experiment or something like that. No, they benefit from the profits from their advertisers naturally, and they want happy users. But they can't have happy users if it's being politicized. So they do not want to actually act in a legal vacuum. They want to have some kind of rules. They just do not want to have that many rules, you know. But some of them, yes. So that's why we are trying where we can push more. Nowadays, actually, it's after, I think, 1 year of the code of conduct being signed by most of the biggest corporations. And I can say that there has been some progress in what I already described. And now the Commission updated it, or published update on how it can look better, and they are actually adding potential sanctions, more cooperation, and some measures in terms of you know, the corporations publishing how they are tackling disinformation within, so that we actually know what is going on behind the curtains. How that will work, because that's already pushing it further, I can't say now, but I do hope that we will see where are the limits of the companies now. But yeah, I am quite optimistic in this regard, actually.
Let me turn to the issue of violence against women in the media. We know that disinformation affects women disproportionately. You have hate speech, verbal attacks, often deterring women from entering politics. What could Kosovo learn from the EU's approach to protecting women from online violence against women, particularly those hoping to enter politics?
That's a very good question, because to be honest, I don't think there is yet plenty of what Kosovo can learn from the EU, because the EU is also just starting to consider this issue as important. Because yes, especially in politics, women, I presume all over the world, so even in the EU, are being attacked by hate speech and online harassment, bullying and stuff like that. And of course, this is something that men encounter too, but how women encounter these things is vastly different. They have to live with very personal attacks, not about their work, but about their appearance, about their relationships, or about anything that is really personal and not related to their work. And that is a problem. What the EU does to some extent is it's trying to acknowledge that in all of the papers, legislation that is publishing in terms of fighting hate speech and online speech in general. So every time somebody is talking about this, this is mentioned as a huge problem. And what it does is not only, you know, it gets more implemented sensitively into any kind of legislation, it also does the fact that people, let's say, people are more educated that this is happening and this is not normal. This is not standard, or shouldn't be. And this is very important in society to establish this. In Czech Republic, where I am from, for example, it is still quite accepted that women are being attacked like this. And it is it is a big problem, because more people feel enabled to do it. But in the EU in general, it is becoming unacceptable. Like, you are talking about these women like that, that is unacceptable. And then more people tend not to do it, or more people come forward and protect these women. And that's a very good narrative. And I think, you know, if I had like one advice, and it's not completely like in terms of legislation, it's don't make such hate speech normalized. Call out everyone who is doing this and say, this is bad, like this shouldn't be allowed. And it's not about like censorship, it's more like normalizing that people should be criticized based on their work, not based on some, artificial measures such as appearance or something personal.
NDI has launched a campaign to tackle the issue of violence against women in politics, and we call it #NotTheCost. So maybe have the EU launch that as well and make it a global effort. We're asking our audience to promote it, #NotTheCost, because it is so pervasive, and we'd love to see the EU pick that up. Let me just follow up on the problem, and have you, if you're comfortable sharing any personal experiences that you might have undergone about being attacked as a woman in politics yourself, and what is the message that we can send to people in politics, men and women, to stand up to this all too pervasive challenge?
Yes, thank you for the question. Well, I just recently, or this is actually happening on a daily basis, I receive threats, I receive even sometimes death threats and very nasty messages. And just a few days ago, I actually was at a demonstration regarding sexual and household violence, and of course the demonstration was against it. And I had their cardboard that was talking, and I was there with my boyfriend actually, and we had like a pair cardboards, and I had there, do you want to have sex? And he had yes. And the point was that consent is the important thing, and it's that easy. It's not like, oh, I didn't know whether she wanted it, or man should want it all the time or something like that. It's about communication and asking. But because I was there with, quite provocative cardboard, do you want to have sex? And there he was with yes, because we are consensual partners. Of course, on the internet, people flipped the table like, oh, this is unacceptable, and I received actual violence and death threats over this, just promoting a consensual sexual intercourse. It was bizarre, but that's how it is. And the message I think we should send to, or I would send to other men and women in politics, is that I know it is very difficult to persevere in this. And then, of course, that's why psychopaths and other people that do not care at all are persevering in politics. But we should not let them. We should not leave the politics just to people that can persevere this amount of harassment. It is difficult for me. I was really depressed and sad for a couple of days, and I still remember it. And I kind of am afraid to go outside actually because of the threats that I received. But I also think like, no, this should not be normal. And if we ideally support each other and let each other know that, hey, I received such messages too, and it's not normal, and publish it and call these people that are doing it, and even go to police. It's completely normal to go to police and try to deal with that because there is legislation that is dealing with hate speech. Then I think we can change something. But yes, it's difficult, and it's difficult to persevere because we are humans. We have emotions, and it hurts us. Even if we are trying to not let it hurt us.
Well, your courage is an inspiration, so thank you for sharing that story. Let me turn now to another leg of your triangle and foreign interference. You mentioned Sputnik. We see quite a bit in the Balkans of blatantly false information from Moscow and then ricocheting around the region. And just interested to learn from the EU of how the EU is addressing this real threat and what types of steps might folks here in Kosovo adopt in addition to being aware that it exists and checking sources. I think that this threat is growing, and it isn't just Moscow. We see it from other countries as well.
Yes, I heard you a little badly, but I presume you are asking about what the EU can help to do in the region of Kosovo, right?
No, about foreign influence, the Russians. How do we push back on foreign disinformation in the Balkans?
All right, I think I understand the question now. Well, of course, it's also the EU's part to do something in there because Russia or even other foreign actors are influencing all of our countries and are trying to interfere with our elections, with our information space, and it is a growing problem everywhere. What can we do is, of course, identifying these actors and these threats and trying to block them from such an influence, such as I mentioned, tracking down the money flows, because disinformation is actually a huge business. Only a few foreign actors have it as some ideological hybrid warfare issue, but most of the actors within the country are actually doing it, simply just for the money. And if you cut out these disinformation businesses, then it is even easier to tackle that. As for any cooperation with the EU, I also think that, especially in terms of fact-checking NGOs, there is a lot that we can do in terms of support, sharing know-how, and also, of course, on the platforms, sharing already fact-checked information, so that something that has been fact-checked in one region or in one country can be immediately spread into other countries that, hey, this is a lie, this is propaganda or disinformation. And because of how the social media work, this is actually a very easy step, this sharing of know-how, because the online world is like instant. Once something is fact-checked, it can be tracked by algorithms and it can be published everywhere that it appeared on the internet. So yes, so maybe it's already quite technical, but I think this is very simple yet effective solution or step.
Well, let me dig just a minute into the technicalities of that. We heard yesterday from a famous fact checker of the Washington Post who said he was kind of the first fact checker, Glenn Kessler, and now there's hundreds of fact checkers around the world. But either in the Czech Republic or in the EU, what is it that the NGOs need to be able to credibly fact check? You said you've worked with them. What type of support does governments need to give to the NGOs to be good fact checkers? And either in your own government or the EU, what types of technical assistance, financial assistance do they need to be able to do a credible job as fact checkers?
Thank you. I think that what the NGOs needs the most is actually not money, even though that would be my second choice of word, but it's that government and the corporations or companies are cooperating. Right now, it looks like, for example, Facebook is hiring independent fact checkers or independent NGOs that are focusing on fact checking, and Facebook is pretty much paying them for it to fact check the content. And the government has no control over it or no check. And that is problematic because Facebook is still not a democratically elected body or institution. As I mentioned, it focuses on just on its profit. So we can't really know that it's not blocking or manipulating its fact-checking. So we can't say the fact-checkers are independent, even if the fact-checkers are. But we can't say that because they are paid by the corporation. But if the fact-checkers were just being chosen by the government and the government forced the fact-checkers onto the platform, it would also not work, because the platform would be like, well, you are trying, to censor the information flow here, and you are just government, and what if you have your own agenda and stuff like that. So what needs to happen is that these two government companies need to work together, control and check each other, so that there are no underlying causes or reasons, and together they choose independent fact checkers, and the independent fact checkers then transparently to the general public, which is the last check, can transparently share what they did, how they did it, and why they did it. And once we have this control, I think that we will trust the independent fact checkers that they are independent and competent, because we will have all the reasons to. And yes, as I mentioned, secondly, what they need most is of course money, because if you really want to pay experts that are competent and they know what to do, how to look for sources, and it's not an easy business, Bellingcat could talk about it, then they really need to pay these experts. They can't do it their whole life voluntarily.
So does the EU actually hire fact checkers to fact check the fact checkers?
Sorry, are you trying to support financially?
Yeah, does the EU actually hire fact checkers to check on the fact checkers? How does that work technically?
No, we are not there yet. It is just a model that the EU is trying to work with. Also, once we, of course, have the proper legislation. Right now, it's mostly, as I said, voluntary. So it's let's say, wishful thinking that yes, this would be best if it worked like that. But as I mentioned, it works just through the companies. Just Facebook is hiring the fact checkers, etc. And this is what I described as the ideal model that the EU is striving for. Also, once it establishes the obligatory legislation.
Let me close then. I think we have about 2 minutes left to just sort of get your advice if you look into your crystal ball, and where would you like to see the EU going in terms of reforms in the media and the whole information industry. What reforms really would you hope would take place to combat the threat of disinformation and foreign influence, and so that we in Kosovo might learn from your ideal world, a few years out from now?
That's nice last question, because I really like to dream about the perfect setup and the ideal solution. Well, I already talked about a few today. I think I really need to start, and with emphasis on the long-term solutions, because being also very free-minded, and I like the internet as it is, not very much controlled and free to share, to explore, to discuss ideas. I really think that we need to educate people more in how to approach the internet, how to approach the information space, and how to not let themselves be vulnerable towards that, because otherwise there really could not be any legislation that would solve it. And as I like to say, we can't, hold hand of the user of the online space or information space and walk them all their life. They need to, grow up and be adults in terms of information space one day. And I think really we need to help with that, because it's not like natural for everyone. And we still have generations that did not grow up with the online world. So I think it's only fair to share with them the knowledge and the system and how it works. So yes, that's really important part that I need to put emphasis on. And I think that especially, talking to you in Kosovo, with national parliament, this is something that national parliament, apart from EU, because EU can't do it, this is something you can do, because you have the education system in your hands, or Kosovo has it. So that would be definitely a point that I want to give across. Another maybe ideal world that I want to mention as my last remark is in terms of emancipation of the user, because and it's not what I just talked about, it's about making them more informed so that they can vote there, but actually emancipating them so that they know how to set up their own bubble or their own environment in the online space, and enabling them that. For example, I remember times when on Facebook, in your source, in your wall or in your feed, you could actually set up so that it shows the most recent events and not the most so-called relevant, which is some random algorithm I don't see inside of it, and I don't know what is relevant for me based on Facebook. And if I could just set it up based on the recent and actually choose what I want to see, that would also greatly help. And I talked about it slightly. It's about a safe design of the platforms, and we can also enforce it. But I really want to, I think a lot of the debate is about what the government can do in terms of legislation and what the platforms can do in terms of regulation of their content. But I really think that we are forgetting the most important part in this, which is the user and what the user can do to set up their environment better. And are we allowing the user to do it? Not yet. So I do hope that I will still, live in a world where I can set this up again.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the wonderful insights, fascinating discussion, and hope we can welcome you in Kosovo when the pandemic's over. So thank you so much for all the great advice. Now let me invite Dea Beichai to the stage, who will introduce the next panel on information disorders in the electoral process. Dea.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you.
So we had a very interesting discussion regarding the EU perspective on information disorder. Now we will narrow the discussion down, and we will discuss about the information disorder across the election processes. The political communication is changing continuously in an unpredictable way. Today, more than ever, politicians and political leaders are more and more capable to transmit their messages to citizens directly through social networks, which provide great opportunities. The new media environment transformed the political campaigns, the civic engagement, participation, and redefined the role of journalists. In order to better understand the information integrity disorders during the election processes, aiming to address the challenges, in the first panel of the second day of the conference DISICON, we will precisely discuss about these challenges. This panel will be moderated by Donika Emine. The work of Ms. Emine relates mainly to analysis of public politics, international relations. She used to work in the Secretariat of International Transparency in Berlin, Balkan Institute of Politics, and General Consulate of Kosovo in New York. Donika Emine presently is Executive Director of Civicos Platform. Donika, welcome. Greetings. I hope you can hear me. I hope everything is all right with the microphone. So welcome to the discussion panel, which aims to discuss the information disorder and electoral processes. I believe that both topics are familiar topics in Kosovo, considering that the election processes were very frequent, actually every single year in the last years. I'm among a hybrid panel, namely half online and half here in the hall. Same apply to the panelists. I have the pleasure to have with me the representative of Vedvendosye, who is physically here, Ali Majuka. Thank you very much for your participation. We appreciate your presence. Even though all political parties were invited, Ledek canceled the participation due to health condition. Ms. Halimi and other political parties did not take the invitation due to other engagements that they consider more important for them. However, this topic is very important, especially for them, especially during the election campaigns, during the election process, whereby there were many complaints by political parties themselves, precisely because of disinformation, the way of communication in the political aspect in Kosovo. So the hybrid commons give us this opportunity to have a representative from EUS Wilson Center, Nina Yankovic. Welcome to the panel.
It's going to be hybrid because I will be speaking in English with you and I'll be speaking in Albanian with Mr. Mandjuka and the rest of the audience that is Albanian speaking. This way we spare time in translation or potential technical issues that we might have. Po kthehem tash në Shqip,
Now going back to Albanian, so the power of information is great. It can be beneficial, it can be very detrimental, especially if it happens during the electoral process, but it does not determine the election process. And we continuously discuss, especially when this issue becomes very sensitive right before the election, and this determines the way how the citizen communicates with politicians, directly impacts on the way how the citizen trusts the institutions, the political elite, and directly affects the participation of citizens in political processes. It is very well known that Kosovo has not been immune to this trend of disinformation that took place during the election processes in developed countries as well. In Kosovo, this was not only the case with elections, because a very well published report by NDI yesterday, and we have to reiterate continuously during this event. This is a very good report which in detail explains how disinformation took place in Kosovo, misogyny, and which were also discussed in the previous panel, the external influence, the way how the political parties, instead of contributing to this system, they were detrimental against each other during the election process. The same was with the European Parliament, where last year explicitly showed how the EU, together with the Western world, took their burden to fight this phenomenon, whereby EU explicitly in its European Parliament report came with a statement that the disinformation took place right before the government was overthrown last year in Kosovo. It's very good that today we are here and we have Mr. Mandjuka here. It's great to have you here.
from my guests here to actually discuss about, the electoral process and how this has affected, this way of new communication has affected the communication, political communication. Mandjuka, po kthehem te ju.
Now going back to Mr. Mandjuka, thank you. Thank you for being here. So, with a very basic question, all new platforms, as highlighted by Adea, determine the way how we communicate today, how we organize the election campaigns, how intense they are, and how little influence we have to control them, especially when it comes to disinformation. To what extent do you think that this development of this tremendous development and digitization, especially during the pandemics, whereby everything happened online and was even huge, larger penetration into the citizens, the way how online communication of political messages took place? Thank you, Donika. Thank you for your invitation. I feel honored being part of this panel. I happen to be on my own from the political parties, but we have a longer experience in our involvement, especially in the online or social networks. This came as a need because as an extra parliamentary entity or subject, we expressed or we disclosed our opinions, and we used alternative channels all the way to the social networks. We are one of the political subjects that were more active in using social media and to disclose our positions, political positions. And of course, this does not replace the direct communication with the citizens. The meetings were never replaced by the online with the exception of the time during the pandemics, and we know what happened. In addition to being closed, we were active in social networks, and we saw that a battle took place. I personally, from my personal experience, I never had the chance within a short period of pandemics to deal with so much information, but also disinformation. And during this time, if you see my wall, it was loaded with information and disinformation. So the way how the disinformation took place before the social networks, and they go side by side with the journalism, with the media. But what happened with the social networks is a democratization of a fake news. So this special right in inverted commas that media had to filter the news but also to release the fake news. Now the fake news has been democratized, whereby every citizen who has a Facebook profile can open a page and can multiply the fake news. On the other hand, here we see that when we publish or post our stances or positions, we see the citizen reaction. Now, here we start losing the education aspect or emancipating, uh, because here you can see what is being liked, and through liking, it will produce counter effect. And then the public, the wider public, will start determining the values. And then this leads us to a spectacular aspect whereby political parties like this, or it's very convenient to incite this kind of debate. On the other hand, with media, two things took place. On one hand, we had this challenge between professional ethics and groups of interests, which always did the pushing, but with the arrival of the social networks, another challenge, namely the monetization of the views or clicks. And this stimulated media how to become more creative in order to incite engagement even more, and how to stimulate comments regardless if they offend each other or they support the media, but just for the sake of circulation. So this challenge, so media find themselves in this challenge, but also the political parties, they find themselves in this challenge whereby they have, whether they have the role of the public education or they become a part of certain trends. We try through our official profiles, namely our web page, the profile of the president and the prime minister. We try to give our examples as to what our stances and positions are, what kind of behavior we should reflect. Now, it's impossible to manage the entire public, but I believe that the battle in social networks is not a battle that takes place regardless of what is happening in reality in public. Facebook is more a manifestation of what had already started in society. But we saw this especially during the pandemics, and we saw that this debate has increased during the pandemics. But I would not uh, remove Facebook from the current reality. I completely agree with you, and the data from the NDI report identified the Facebook platform as one of the platforms where such circulation of information took place, despite other platforms which were less active. For example, Twitter, because even the sponsoring of content in Twitter is more complicated and complex and more expensive than Facebook. And Facebook was cheaper and more accessible to the Kosovo citizens.
Ina, if I may. How did the emergence of new social media platforms, I mean, you coming from the United States and knowing what happened with Cambridge Analytica, that's just one of the cases that actually went viral. I mean, this is an ongoing process. How did this change political communication? And knowing that in the US, it was actually, it happened way before than it is happening now here in Kosovo.
Well, thank you so much, Donika, for that question. It's a delight to be on this panel today. Thank you to NDI for having me. I actually am an NDI alumna. I used to work on the Eurasia team, so always very, very happy to be
Welcome back
NDI
to the family
events,
then.
especially important ones. Yes, thank you. Especially important ones like this. So political communication, I think, has changed really drastically because of social media. And it's not necessarily just that information is traveling faster and farther. It has a lot to do with what we were just discussing, in that you can target your messages to the people who are going to be most vulnerable to them, to the people who are going to find them most resonant. And you can perfect those messages over time. So what we've seen, not only with domestic political communicators, but through foreign influence as well, is that anybody who has a credit card and a social media account, and now you don't really even need a credit card, you can very, very minutely really target those messages if you know how to manipulate the platforms. You can test your messages over time and really get the stuff that's going to be most resonant and affect behavior change. So, we can't necessarily draw a straight line between Russian interference in 2016 and Hillary Clinton's election loss. But we can say that over time, there was a drip, drip, drip of certain narratives into certain people's feeds, both on the right and the left, which depressed voter turnout, which increased people's attention to certain stories that may not have been fully grounded in fact. And that has changed how we think about politics over time. And it's also divided us. I specialize in foreign interference, and I think something that we miss a lot about disinformation and fake news more broadly is that it's not necessarily stuff that's fake, right? It's grounded in truth, it's grounded in emotion. And the political communicators are very expert at taking those emotions and over time finding the ones that drive behavior change, that drive the most engagement. And they can look on the back end on platforms like Facebook and say, okay, this message is really resonating with this particular group. Let's drive that home over and over and over again. And so in some ways that can be a very powerful thing when you have social movements using social media for good, for democratic means, but it can also have ulterior motives and drive this distrust in our political processes and in the media, which it plays an important role in the political process as well. So I'm not particularly optimistic right now about the role that social media is playing in our democracy without talking about some regulatory frameworks, which many nations are pursuing right now, in order to rein some of the more detrimental tendencies in.
Thanks a lot, Nina. You brought very important issues, because my next question is specifically on the elections. I will continue with you to then, switch the language, but also a direction here. How do you think that the social media has become like the main tool that is being used? I mean, how is it in the US? Is it like becoming the main tool to target the voters? And is it like the main tool that is being used in political campaign during the elections? And how advanced the United States is to actually try to prevent, something that was similar to Cambridge Analytica or profiling online or mass profiling online that took place. And are you ready, being the most developed country in this regard, one of the most developed countries in this regard, to actually overcome this and prevent?
Well, that's a difficult question. So what we've seen is that, the political parties are increasingly relying on social media to communicate with voters, not only their general messages, but again, to micro-target messages to swing voters in certain states or even certain districts or polling places. That's how minutely you can target an ad on Facebook. And so what we've seen over time is increasingly large spending on political advertisements online. However, unlike television, print, and radio ads, online, we really have no federal regulations about what political parties can and cannot do with political advertisements online. And that's a huge problem. Since 2017, there's been a bill in Congress called the Honest Ads Act. It is a bipartisan piece of legislation sponsored by both Amy Klobuchar on the Democratic side. Originally, it was sponsored by John McCain on the Republican side, and since he passed away, it's been taken up by Senator Lindsey Graham. So really bipartisan support. And yet it's been stuck in Congress, stuck in committee, and hasn't been given a vote on the Senate floor since 2017. And what this piece of legislation would do is introduce some of the same transparency requirements that we have for print, radio, and television ads for online ads. But as it stands, there is no requirement that voters are informed about who is paying for advertisements online. And that's a huge problem. We've seen some of the social media companies introduce their own transparency requirements, but because there are no regulations on parties, on candidates, or on the social media platforms about this, we don't know how any of these are complying with that. And in fact, in countries like Ukraine, where I've spent a lot of time and looked at the advertising archives that were kind of tried out in Ukraine and then brought over here to the United States, I know that the social media platforms are making mistakes in their compliance with these ad archives. So we have a big hole there. But then beyond that, this is not just a question about advertising anymore. I mentioned that you don't even need a credit card to be able to send this political messaging. When you have developed a large following online, millions of people or hundreds of thousands of people in these ad hoc sort of groups and pages that are self-amplifying, really all you need to do is find specific influencers who perhaps for money, perhaps just out of their altruism, will amplify that content for you. And it can go viral on its own without having to pay for it. And that we can't regulate, right? Because we believe very strongly in the United States in freedom of expression and the First Amendment. So we're in a very tense situation here. And I hope that, our Congress will start to address these things. Certainly social media platforms are under a lot of scrutiny right now, but it's an extremely polarizing issue. And I think members of Congress and political representatives in general know that these regulations are going to have a direct effect on their ability to campaign. And so they're treading very carefully.
Now I'm feeling scared because I was hoping that you at least know how to deal with this, because prevention is more important than fact-checking. I mean, fact-checking is okay, but once the damage has been done, undoing it is, fact-checking wouldn't help. I mean, we tried it, and I think we need to be more to actually prevent it from happening. So I'll go back to Kosovo here. Arlind,
Arlind, it is very important to discuss how social media were used in last elections. You mentioned that the main channel of communication with constituents, not only due to pandemics, but also the changes of categories of voters. Now we have young voters who are mostly present on social media, rather than in political rallies. Do you think that social media replacing the conventional way of campaigning in elections? In particular, I'm mentioning here Vetvendosie. You mentioned yourself that, especially in the last elections, you were much more active than other political parties, especially on Facebook, through groups that not necessarily were yours, but they were groups that presented themselves like the group for Prime Minister is the largest group that is publishing various contents, and Vetvendosie leaders are depicted there. How did you manage all this, and do you think it's possible for political parties to discipline or to regulate this issue without having a legal framework in place? Let me relate to a sort of hope that I see from this fatalism of our discussion, if I may say so. And it was proven to be so. Let me relate to legitimacy of constituents. I could see that it is decisive for the political entities, no matter what happens with political parties. In social media, there is a kind of atmosphere that is created, but in small societies like Kosovo, I don't think the people's will be overwhelming only because of social media. You need to have popular support, which is translated into social support, social media support. We exist since 2005, and since 2009, we were active in Facebook. But only from 2021, we received this good result. I think due to huge aggressiveness against our movement, especially during the pandemic's time, as report states, it happened the opposite. Some kind of aggressivity has made people do the opposite of what they did. As I said earlier, I have seen a lot of aggressiveness of major parties who are also present in social media, and some kind of engagement of other parties to attack Vedvendosye. But the opposite has happened. And also where you participate in debates, we had some surveys that became famous every day. We wanted to call them, under parenthesis, that these are fake news, but the election result turned out to be in accordance with what based on the surveys that we conducted. So we could see that it is not only the trend of social networks, but there is an overwhelming support among the people, and it was demonstrated where it could, because there were no rallies, no gatherings, but people used social media. And this atmosphere was not started from the scratch. We started from 2020, 2021 to be politically active in parliament, out of parliament, in order to reach the point where we reached. But I don't think this has happened only due to social networks. Of course, some damage was done by other parties, but also we had success from our part. Without having some kind of legitimacy and atmosphere, this cannot be translated into direct results. I think in larger societies, it is possible because direct contact is lesser possible. But in Kosovo, we were more attacked than we attacked. But the opposite has happened. And it is not only because of social media. It was some kind of flavor that we gave at the end, but not decisive. I was a bit shocked from what I could see in total lockdown that we had during the pandemics. Not only due to fake news and fake media that turned up, and they presented various kinds of news that were detrimental for our movement. And the opposite happened, a backlash happened, because in every fake news, not every fake news can be invented in laboratory if there is no impression in the society. So there is a hegemony of discourse, but if this is the case, it is good, because we need to speak to people so that they should not be manipulated. Of course, education is priority in this sense. I mentioned earlier preventive, because not always a result that is favorable to you, that came from a process that is acceptable or healthy. We were present in the elections were held on 15th of February, and the political discourse was concerning. It concerned us. This is continuing even today, and there is a polarization that is taking place. Nina.
Something that is beyond elections, political processes around the world, because all electoral processes produce governments. Governments talk to each other. That's bilateral, multilateral cooperation. And being from the United States, you know the kind of roller coaster you have been through, especially with the multilateral cooperation platforms in the past years. How do you think that this disinformation, it's in a way having an impact on political processes around the world, but also how countries communicate? I mean, now we are worried about what's happening in elections, for instance, in Estonia or in Russia, Ukraine, because it determines then the way that these countries behave towards us. So how do you think that this political communication online and disinformation has had an impact on this?
Well, that's a really interesting question, and I'll turn to just something that happened recently in our own multilateral talks. And so President Biden is in Europe right now. He's in Cornwall for the G7 summit. He will be, of course, meeting with President Vladimir Putin in Geneva next week. And ahead of that meeting, President Zelensky of Ukraine was trying to interact with President Biden. And he was pretty disappointed about President Biden's decision to stop pushing for the stalling of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, the gas pipeline that would very much affect Ukraine. And rather than discuss with President Biden one-on-one his concerns, President Zelensky decided to communicate via the press. He gave an exclusive interview to Axios, and he was tweeting about this. And that type of political communication and online diplomacy is something that we've seen increasingly, but especially during the Trump administration. And I don't think that that's going to play well necessarily with President Biden, who's very old school and does things I think person to person. He's very big on interpersonal relations. So that's one example of how we've seen diplomatic negotiations and influence between leaders move online. But I think it also adds a degree of uncertainty at any time to elections and political processes around the world, because there could be a hack or a leak that is publicized that affects relations, bilateral relations between two countries, or multilateral negotiations, like the Iran nuclear deal, for instance, or like any of our climate agreements, like the negotiations between Palestine and Israel. There's an online component to all of these things. And I think it leads to an additional layer of hesitancy or distrust between world leaders. And that's not just to speak at all to the distrust that it breeds in normal citizens and their government. So we see all these allegations about foreign meddling and things like this, sometimes that aren't backed up with evidence for people who aren't experts, right? And I think that leads to a giant question mark for a lot of people. You know, can I really trust when I go to get my car registration renewed that that's going to work for me, that local government's going to work for me, that my vote is going to be counted as they say it will, that I'm going to receive my my tax refund check or things like this. And I think people have really lost that connective tissue, not only with their governments at the local level, which serve them more than the federal level, but also with these institutions that really, they have very little connection to their everyday lives, like NATO, like the European Union, like the G7. We need to do a better job communicating why those institutions are important for democracies around the world. And I think that's another way that that Europe and the transatlantic community are kind of failing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Communication, at least, you know, coming from the EU and for quite a long being able to adapt to the new dynamics that are out there, and for, you know, partially for being victim of all the fake news because due to the lack of capacities to actually prevent it. And this is surely something that has happened here. I'll turn with the same question to Arlene, because it's really important to know just not how this communication has affected political processes in Kosovo, but how also Kosovo navigates around the region and beyond. And Arlene, po kthehem te diçka e cila është
Arlen, let me turn to something which is important, which is online diplomacy that we discussed earlier. Before getting there, how much is misinformation is affecting? I mentioned the report of European Parliament last year, where explicitly mentioned as a phenomenon the way how this resulted in overthrowing the government. How much is this misinformation determining, this deficiency in information, how much it is determining political processes? Secondly, something related to latest developments is Twitter diplomacy. It was discussed how we navigate against partners outside of Kosovo. How much are we capable of drafting and compiling messages that are short, concise, and strategic, that depict our diplomacy? These are two different topics, but they indicate how much the communication affects political processes. The topic that you are discussing, I didn't deal that much with it. But as an external observer, I think this has a lot of influence. There are some persons that are contacted, like civil society organizations, political entities that have some impressions. But it is still up to political entities, media, civil society, that have the will to push forward. They have the hegemony of discourse, and then with foreign relations. But I have seen that I agree with the diplomacy aspect, especially in Twitter, with some negligence, even from earlier times. There were many misunderstandings, and then portals amplified those bad messages, and this led to many misunderstandings. During the campaign, this has happened a lot for internal use. We had some news, fake news that were published allegedly from our website as a position of Vedvendosye, but this was not our position nor our communiques, and they were deleted afterwards. And depending on the topics, like opening of the embassy in Jerusalem, and an authorial op-ed was found, and it was stated that this was the position of Vedvendosye about Israel or about US. So there were such misinterpretations that will yield its effects. It was for internal use, and of course it had implications even in international arena.
With a question that is very interesting, because in the past years, I mean, this is not just the case in the United States, even in Kosovo and in other countries, the far rights have been, increasing in politically. So the societies are polarized. And not just the COVID-19 pandemic has further amplified this. It was even before. For instance, in the EU, we had the refugee crisis, a lot of events that in a way have determined the way that societies think or the attitude of the people towards numerous issues. So how do you think that, the role of the social media and the online communication has, in a way, do you think that it had a detrimental impact and further contributed to polarization in countries around the world, because this phenomenon is, in a way, taking place everywhere? I mean, when Biden took over, he said that I'm the president of all, even of those who haven't voted for me, trying to, in a way, calm down the potential reactions from the other side. So how did this, online communication affected this?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a story about something that happened around this time last year. A little earlier on in the pandemic, I was doing some research into the reopen movement here in the United States, which tried to get our state governments, which had their own individual orders for staying on lockdown or keeping businesses closed. People were being active in protests and trying to get these state governments to reopen society, reopen businesses. And so I was looking at how this rhetoric was happening on Facebook. And what I saw was from one activist who was from my home state of New Jersey. In fact, he even went to the same high school as me. He owned a local gym, and he decided to go against the governor's stay-at-home order and reopen his gym. And when he did that, so many people flocked to his cause from Facebook. They saw his posts on a reopen Facebook group, and he became this celebrity in the reopen movement and attracted people from all sorts of political polarized groups, from the QAnon conspiracy theory, from white supremacist movements. And I looked into how this happened, and it was because Facebook was recommending this group and this post that he made to all of those other fringe movements. And so you would join a reopen Facebook group, or perhaps a alternative health Facebook group that was looking at natural remedies to COVID-19, which we know don't exist.
Yeah.
And they would look at that content and then be recommended stuff about QAnon or stuff about anti-vaccination or 5G chips in people's arms because of vaccination, all of which was untrue. And they were being driven to that content based on their previous tendencies. And that's something that's happening all around the world. Anything, you join a group on Facebook about a fringe movement in Ukraine, and you'll start to get more of that content as well. Facebook says that they are trying to roll some of this back, but there has been investigation after investigation that shows that people are actually still getting recommended this very polarizing political content, even after it's been flagged as potentially harmful on Facebook. So what we see here is either a lack of capacity to address the problem or a lack of political will at the top of the company. I think it's a little bit of both. You know, this is a huge problem. They can't possibly police everything on the platform, but at the same time, they're making money from it, right? The more that we spend on the platform, clicking and telling them our preferences, the more money that Facebook makes. And that incentive structure is just completely out of whack. And it is driving further polarization, and it's driving families apart. It is endangering public health and public safety. And it's a very, very scary thing to think about when it is not only just one country that's dealing with this, but all the countries around the world. And in some cases, Facebook is the internet. Facebook is either subsidized by cell phone plans or people use it, you know, as their primary method of communication. I know that's the case in Ukraine. So it's a scary thing to know that a private company in particular has so much power, not only of the information that we consume, but how we perceive one another and power to affect our relationships in that way.
Absolutely. I mean, I totally agree, especially on the political will to address the issue, because the capacities are there. If there's a capacity to harm, then there is definitely capacity to actually prevent it and improve it. But of course, you know, these platforms become very popular during the elections campaign. I mean, that we have seen in Kosovo, which that deeply, in a way, contributed to the polarization of the society. I mean, I will turn to Ardin here, who is with me, and will probably share his experiences with polarization in Kosovo during the elections. So Ardin, kryptos media social.
All these social media polarized us, and perhaps I'm relatively young and I don't remember the previous political processes, but for me, it was one of the most polarized campaigns possible. Perhaps due to the circumstances, COVID, the overthrow of government in 2020. So there were lots of elements that affected or resulted in this deep division of society, both for national interests. I'm not speaking here about who we were going to vote, but the problem of dialogue, the vaccination. So everything is polarizing, and there's so much online discussion that is impossible, and it's a psychological burden to deal with all this debate. To what extent do you think social media uh, had an impact on this in Kosovo? In my opinion, this happened during the pandemics from three various positions. The first position was clicking or views, which is a kind of incitement for media, then spectacles, and TV medias, which aim to increase the number of viewers. And then on the other hand, political parties, since there are people present there, it's a good opportunity to reach out to these people present. So if on Facebook you have 99% of the people online, then it's a great opportunity to talk to them. So in itself, it's not a bad thing. So to talk to people through an easy means of communication, it's not a bad thing in itself. But we know how this works out in TV shows, and depending what happened on the portals. This now we have a question for citizens, for example. From political parties, portals, they pose lots of questions with the tendency of making as much engagement as possible. So they ask the citizens, what do you think of a certain issue, in order to engage the citizen. So the polarization was the result of a lack of functioning of relevant institutions. For example, on one hand, of course, we will have fake news. A certain figure is damaged, and then they are sent to the independent board of journalists. We received answers, and there were lots of suggestions. Since the figure of a certain politician was damaged, they are they are filed as to prosecution for libel. So, for example, since 2014 onwards, those complaints were filed and they never received an answer. So, on one hand, people take the justice on their own hands, whereby they start debating in social networks, and on the other hand, they damage the judicial process and they discourage the people from rather than following relevant institutions, they will resort to fake news and personal insults. So there is a large discouragement by the judicial institutions to impose a certain punishment on a political figure, political party that made libel against a certain person or group. I don't remember a single punishment or sanction against anyone for such a libel. So, a proper reporting by the political entities and correct reporting by media, but also proper functioning of relevant institutions would would subside this polarism. You highlighted something very important, which opens a way to my last question in this panel. Nina,
In a way then has been tackled by Arlind, which is the institutional capacities on how to deal with disinformation in general. You've mentioned, I mean, we constantly talk, when we talk about disinformation, we target social media platforms and people who own them, and rarely talk about the politicians, because the social media are being utilized by politicians. If that isn't for the politician and political parties, I mean, they are the driving force behind it. The social media is just a tool. It can be easily used for fashion, for health, for healthy discussion, but it's not. So let's talk about the political will to actually from the political parties, because they are the driving force, especially in the elections. So do you think that the political parties in the US, but also like from the work that you have done abroad, are doing enough to combat information? Then if not, what can we do more? What can they do more in a way to stop this?
Yeah, so the thing that I always find myself repeating at events like this is that disinformation is not a political issue, it is a democratic issue. Ultimately, the victim is our democracy.
Absolutely.
Disinformation might benefit one or another political party in the short term, but in the long term, if the effect is that people have less trust in institutions, that people aren't going to go out to vote, that people are just going to disengage from the political process and from the gathering of information necessary to be an informed citizen, then we're shooting ourselves in the foot. This disinformation is going to be our own demise. And so what I think is really important is to remind politicians of that. And I do that in my work when I testify in front of Congress. Next week, I'll be testifying in front of European Parliament. But our politicians, and I say this pretty much the world over, every country that I've studied in detail has this problem to some extent. They're not doing enough. They are not recognizing that the utility of disinformation in the short term is far less than the impact that it will have on democracy in the long term. This is not just in the United States, where of course we've become very polarized. This is also in countries like Poland and the Republic of Georgia, which have really been, I would say, to use an American idiom, they're the pot calling the kettle black. They say things like, oh, foreign disinformation is very, very important. We need to stop it. But then they use the same tactics that Russia is using on their own citizens. That's not acceptable. And so voters, I think, hold the key here. If you are tired of seeing these attacks, these baseless conspiracy theories in the democratic environment that you live in, go out and tell your elected representatives that this is not acceptable to you, either by getting in touch with them as a constituent or at the ballot box. Make sure you go out and vote for people who represent the truth. Ultimately, democracy is about the people. And so we're the front lines of the information war when it comes to not amplifying disinformation online, and when it comes to holding our elected representatives accountable for being servants of the truth. Democracy can't work without authoritative information. And so that's something I try to drive home. It's something that I hope inspires the audience today and to democratic citizens around the world. It's as much incumbent on us as it is on the Mark Zuckerbergs and the national politicians of the world.
Absolutely. I mean, I totally agree with you. The impact that it has on the democracy, it's detrimental. I mean, the Freedom House report this year came out even more explicit with democracy under threat. It's not decline anymore, it's under threat, showing clear messages that if we don't do something about it, we're gonna lose. And this is also very important here in Kosovo, because during the elections, it's all the political parties that actually complain about this, but in a way, all the content that is being put out there using these channels are from the political parties or an interest group that is linked to a political party, because at the end of the day, they are competing in the election. So I'm going back to Arlene here to specifically ask about this. Arlene.
All political parties are being attacked by fake news and are victims of disinformation, but at the end of the day, they are competing against each other, and the information that they pass out using such tools, be those portals, Facebook, or even influencers, as highlighted by Nina, are political parties themselves. They are the driving force that generate these news. Now, what could political parties do? You are in the assembly now, and Nina highlighted how a legal process should be initiated in order to regulate, or at least make effort to regulate, as it would be beneficial to the country. And if it has not been so far, what could you do more now, considering the fact that civil society organizations and you have to contribute to the education of society, because we are the ones who decide, and we should be able to tell the difference between the truth and fake news.
It is true that political entities, civil society, media have some kind of evaluation and assessment, but there are nuances, because not every influence is the same. There was some kind of governance that happened, and misgovernance and the capturing of the state, and this had effects not only in institutions but also through direct and indirect impact. It has caused the news to be twisted, and one party will be suffering from this big debate. I wouldn't put everything, all the political parties in one group, because from the political party I come from, it is fact that we were active on Facebook, but we didn't induce any hate speech. I'm speaking about official positions, because we cannot take ownership of citizens' positions. So we try to give our examples through our official appearance on website, Facebook, and you can see them from 2009 to up to today. As for legal regulation, maybe there is a room to do more, but I don't think Kosovo and the world is suffering due to formalities, lack of formalities. We just need to put things in motion, in function. And still, the topic of political parties. All judicial institutions that we criticize every day, both civil society, media, my entity also criticize them. And we criticize them due to lack of efficiency or partial efficiency. Our judicial bodies punished people, but they only punished certain people, not strong people. And the strong people, besides not being punished, they also have influence on the media everywhere. So I think that by uncapturing the state, uncapturing the institutions, then this degrading will be demolished by the media, by political entities, and the judiciary would be more efficient. Currently, I don't have a concrete proposal how we can formally regulate this. But even if we find the best possible solution, I don't think it is possible. So what do you mean through approach of political parties, some messages that are generated? Messages could be good, messages could be positive, how a woman looks like or how many kilos they weight. But rather than discussing about that, they should discuss about contents or substance. There were discussions that targeted politicians only because of their appearance. I'm not talking about opposition today, but also the same was about a former government where there were a campaign against appearance of some ministers. I wanted to add to this. There were many questions about this, and not only through him, but also through our officials, we tried to manage this. It is not something that can be fixed with a word of mouth. And there were many cases when I corrected many news that were incorrect. And sometimes I had to be silent against certain fake news because it became overpopulated, the issue of correcting fake news. And then the citizens who know that it is a fake news, they are reacting and they ask what is going on. Sometimes they look at how we react on certain fake news. So sending positive messages is also one of the informal ways how to tackle this issue, because we cannot expect only the law to fix everything. It is also up to us. Adea is telling me that I have only 2 minutes.
They call me pessimistic, and I think I am. So trying to kind of change the narrative about myself, we know that there are numerous negative events that occurred due to misinformation, but political communication online has had also positive aspects. You mentioned Poland, and what I liked about Poland recently is how women were angry at the government and they made a change. And we women outside of Poland, well, put a photo on Facebook and supported them. Let's conclude this panel discussion with either a positive message or like what can we do as you know, people to actually help change this narrative and use the social media for good. Cat videos.
Yeah, cat videos are definitely one way. But I think also, you know, this is a way to make politics more accessible to people. This is a way that you can quickly poll your constituents about what is most pressing to them, how you can hear from them regularly, how people can get more involved in government. You know, one thing that was really interesting to me at the beginning of the pandemic was how easily countries like Estonia, which already rely so much on e-governance, were able to shift pretty seamlessly into online activities, from everything from city council meetings to school to actual parliament meetings and discussions and hearings. Things have been a little bumpier here in the United States with all of that, but I think it's shown a light onto our deficiencies in that way and the ways that we can improve and really use this as an opportunity to make democracy more participatory around the world. And so that is something that I think holds promise for social media and the internet. And that's something that everybody can be involved in, you know, subscribing to updates from your local election board or the parties that you are interested in, following the news online and making sure you're vetting your sources so that you're getting news from quality information sources and not sharing disinformation. But this is a real opportunity. I think we need to give people and governments the tools that they need to create the infrastructure that makes it more participatory. But that's the sort of thing that, you know, in an ideal world in the future, I would love to see and a goal that I hope we're moving towards. Thanks again for having me.
Thanks a lot, Nina. The world we would like to have. I will go back to Arlene with the same question. Arlene,
Arlind, what can we do in order to improve all this? Not only you as political parties, but we as citizens. What I was thinking about as we were talking is that even this event, this very event that is also on social media, is a contribution. So this kind of initiatives, such as the one of today and yesterday, is our determination to punish even publicly or to condemn such polarization and language that is negatively used in social media. So even through these discussions, not only in closed round tables, but also open discussions, even in the parliament, it is necessary to have as many discussions as possible. Also through our own examples, to give our own examples, so that each party can take the right lessons on how to behave on social media and how not to get polarized as a society and how to tackle these negative phenomena. Even this kind of events, and I would like to thank you for inviting me and organizing it, it is one of the examples how we can fight this phenomenon. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Arlind. Thank you, NDI, for this organization. Please read the report again, because we need to see where the problem is so that we can address such problem. Thank you, Arlind. Thank you, other political parties. A message that you should be part of these discussions, because this leaves lesser room to complain that you are victims of disinformation.
Online, I hope to be able to host you in person here in Pristina to help us get through this challenge together. Thanks a lot. Panim Direčem.
Mitä kumma heitä joo.
Ja, weet je wel. Maar soort van zo'n telefoon, hè?
Ja,
Anda. Shushke.
Niin shop, det är som så.
Hi, can you hear me? I was without a translation, so I'm kind of in the dark. So I couldn't hear the translation. So am I now?
Yes. Mr. Nedelkov, you can start and share your story in regards to disinformation challenges that you're experiencing in Serbia right now.
Okay.
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Easy topic for a hot afternoon, I'm sure. And thank you for having us. I'm coming from the organization called CRTA. We see ourselves as activists, journalists, researchers who are trying to actually advocate accountability in Serbian society. I believe that accountability and disinformation are directly linked. As when you analyze, and we also heard panelists before, and it's not novelty, on who are the main actors in dispersing disinformation deliberately, and who is benefiting from that, are the same people or the same echelons, same elites who are also trying to be the least accountable to the citizens. Tilda as an organization is looking at the disinformation twofold, and we started to hunt fake information, lies, basically, to be more direct, in 2008, when we saw actually on the CNN a feature program on evaluating the statements from the candidates and in the presidential campaign between the later President Obama and the candidate McCain. And we actually saw that it's quite possible and efficient when you have political candidates, right, main politicians, who are being evaluated and being stamped, their statements being stamped, whether they are false, true, or somewhere in between. And actually, at that time in Serbia, we had, of course, and unfortunately, it's still the case, I would say, but at least we were inspired at that time from the American politics. We had a politician who publicly said that it is completely okay to steal a little. And it was broadcasted on all the media, and there was no public reaction because the public was, to some extent, already used to that kind of messages from the main head politicians, that is, it's okay to steal a little, while we cannot actually negotiate if you steal a lot. And we actually decided that we should try to find a way on how to fight that. And we established True to Meter, a fact-checking portal that is fact-checking the statements of main public figures. And I just before this conference and analyzed what we did so far, and just in the category of falseness or truthfulness of the statements, we had almost 1,000 statements of main politicians in Serbia. Only 1 out of 10 of those is the truth. More than 70% is either false or pants on fire, as our sister organization in the States, PolitiFact, would rate it. So this is just one portion. The other portion is we also are completely aware, especially in the recent years, of the spread of the disinformation in media, and we are trying to monitor that through the constant media monitoring. And what we are doing, we are monitoring how Serbian domestic media are reporting on the 5 key foreign actors or influencers, so to speak. So one is the EU, as we are the EU candidate country, Russia, China, NATO, and the United States. And our fact checkers are also going through this media monitoring database, and they are selecting those statements, those news that are potentially being false or being disinformation. And what we actually concluded, and this kind of monitoring we are conducting since 2016. So now it's almost 5 years where we actually see direct correlation between the unaccountable political elites. As I said, 1 out of 10 statements are only being evaluated as truth on the side of the politicians. And then on the side of the media monitoring, we are seeing that much of the disinformation is actually related to the negative news about the Western democracies. So against the US, against the EU, but then on the third place are disinformation regarding positive narrative about the Russia. And then about the China. There are only few positive, I'm not saying that it's being good that we have disinformation in any with any tone, either positive or negative, towards any of these stakeholders. But at the very last point, we have disinformation that are positive towards the EU. And then when we analyze those articles, it's actually some of the articles related again towards the Serbian propaganda towards the Kosovo. And when we analyze the topics, then it is completely clear that Russia and China, especially Russia, is being used in a Serbian narrative towards the Kosovo and against the European accession process. And what is the main, I would say, goal of all the content that we are being analyzing for years now and not becoming crazy is that what is one thing clear is the intent is not to make anybody believe in the disinformation. The intent is that everybody starts to doubt about everything. And when we also do simultaneous analysis, public opinion polls about people's or citizens' trust in institutions, citizens' trust in media, citizens' willingness to become active in democracy, we see that the trend is negative. We see that about the motivation to be engaged. Citizens don't believe in institutions, citizens don't believe in political parties, they don't believe in politicians, they don't believe in media, traditional especially. And when you analyze who is dispersing, and I think that the Serbian case, it's possible also in the region, but in comparison to some other countries that we compared our data with, in Serbia, actually the disinformation is being spread mainly by online media that have their own TV stations. So basically, TV stations in Serbia are the main actors in dispersing the disinformation. And when you analyze the structure and when you analyze the editorialship of these TV stations, you understand that they're under the strong influence of the government. So I would dare actually to say that the main actors in Serbia who are responsible for spreading disinformation are those who are also at the same time quite engaged in dissolving the mechanisms for keeping them to account. And at the end of that process, we have elections, as CERTA is extremely involved in election monitoring, and especially the dimension one is how media are influencing the citizens' opinions and decision-making process relating to elections. We have that increasing number of people are being disengaged from elections as well. So there is one, I would say, I heard that the predecessors were talking about the Facebook as well. CERTA is engaged in as a third-party fact checker for the Facebook. So our initiative, Istinomer or Truthometer. And I couldn't say that we succeed to do a lot. I mean, we have just a couple of people on board who are trying to write, to fight the whole army of hyper production of disinformation. But I would say that we are optimistic because we are succeeding that with a handful of fact checks that we are doing directly on the Facebook. We succeeded actually to, on monthly basis, flag more than 70,000 posts on Facebook that are being false. And just as a note, mostly the disinformation on Facebook in Serbia is related to the health situation right now with corona and vaccines. But again, they are being connected to the geopolitical narratives like Russia and China again. So all of them, at some point, they're being cooked and steered in one political, I would say, kitchen that is quite nationalistic, that is xenophobic, that is anti-Western, and that is actually trying to disengage people. I know that I am not, I don't send messages of the hope, but when I actually heard that out of those 70,000 articles that are being flagged as fake, basically, 9 out of 10 users of Facebook are not anymore clicking and reading those posts. So that's one of the mechanisms that is functioning, right? That is working. We are trying to also find other means and ways, and together with the NDI, CRTA, a couple of years ago conducted one pilot initiative where we'd actually try to tackle citizens through the channel of communications that we still have under our control, and it's direct contact. I mentioned earlier that the Serbian citizens are mostly informing themselves and forming opinion through the media. But the second most influential way on how they are thinking about the social, political, and economic issues and how they're forming their opinions are through their social environment, so through the friends and family. And what we tried is that in the two municipalities, we tried to, and we succeeded actually to increase the number of people who are more positive towards the EU by directly basically communicating them concrete successes and facts basically on what EU is doing in Serbia and what other stakeholders are trying to claim to be doing, but they're actually doing completely the opposite. I think that from my personal point of view, one can ask, okay, Rasha, but come on, you said that you started back in 2008 and that politicians in Serbia are still doing the same how they did how many years ago. And then we have the social media overwhelming and spreading fastly the disinformation, and you're trying just to scratch that surface. But there is no alternative to this. I just, when I'm talking to my colleagues and friends, we are trying to be as creative as possible to find ways and means on how to tackle this issue, how not to repeat mistakes of our colleagues from abroad, from different countries, and how to use their successes and to apply them here. We, in small successes, in small victories, like I mentioned in these two municipalities, which was extremely hard to do, we are trying to replicate on a bigger scale. But then when you understand that we, against us, have political machinery and political parties who are engaging all the basically media machinery for their own agenda, and that agenda, unfortunately, is not in line with the agenda of media literacy. It's not in charge of the agenda of strengthening institutions. But I think that we have to find ways and means on how to actually engage more with the media association and media organizations as well, because one of the main responsibilities for dispersing this information is in the hands of the media. And I can just, at the end, mention one anecdote, which is basically quite representative, because we have received them a lot on the Facebook after we started couple of months ago to try to combat the disinformation together with Facebook, along with a lot of death threats and different kinds of intimidation that our journalists are receiving. We're also receiving the letters from the media organizations. And they're saying practically this: well, can you please unlock our account, because we didn't know that we are dispersing the disinformation. We didn't check what, we just translated what some other media published. So I think that this mechanism is quite functioning, because at least on the online media, because when you are tackling the financial means of the media outlets who are dispersing this information, then there is a way on how to make more effect, make more impact.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Nedeljkov, for sharing your story. Information in your country.
This was the first story we heard today. Now we will go to the second story, of course, virtually. Now we have Katarina Klingova, who is a senior research for democracy and sustainability in the Institute of Politics GlobSec. She will share her experience in analyzing disinformation and her viewpoints as to how to make society more sustainable in regards to these occurrences. She's also co-author of various analyses on the impact of information and social media in democratic societies, and sustainability, building against hybrid systems, and author of writings for strategic communication.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here. So my name is Katarina Klinkova. I'm a senior research fellow at GlobeSec, and I've been working analyzing disinformation since 2016. And my program eventually started when back in 2015, 2014, we really saw not only in Slovakia, but in the wider region that after the annexation of Crimea, certain online outlets from one day to another became mouthpieces of Kremlin and starting to intensively peddle various disinformation narratives, various pro-Kremlin narratives and propaganda in my country, but also in wider region. And in order to find out how widespread these disinformation are, and such propaganda is among the general public, we start to conduct very specific public opinion polls that focus on some of these disinformation narratives. We've been conducting this research since 2016, and within those years, we really see something that already Rasha mentioned in the previous input, that these narratives are intensively and systematically trying to underestimate our belief in democratic processes, our trust in public institutions. And this is something that we cannot let go. They were trying to foster relations with these international organizations that we ourselves are part of. Often are labeled as agents of CIA, as agents of Soros, and really are challenged by disinformation that is spread against them. They are cyberbullied and face death threats just because they are doing their job, which is not okay, and this shouldn't be enabled. While smear campaigns are usually part of the political debates, and disinformation has been here for ages. That doesn't mean that we should enable it, that we should accept it. For example, during the last presidential elections, one of the candidates, Zuzana Čaputová, who eventually became our president, she was labeled as a puppet of NGOs. She was labeled as a foreign agent supported by CIA and George Soros, who was trying to, take over Slovakia and stage a coup d'etat policies, or policies that were based on democratic principles that some of the actors didn't like. And the smear campaign went even so far that they, in several cases, they manipulated pictures of her, Photoshop pictures of her. In particular, they Photoshop her nose so that she would have more Jewish features. And these pictures were supposedly prove that she has indeed Jewish connections, she has indeed Jewish heritage, which was completely false. So, this is unacceptable. This should not be democratic situation and society. Another thing that really stirred our society, not only in Slovakia, but I think that in Central Europe as such, was the death of Jan Kuciak. Jan Kuciak was an investigative journalist who was shot dead along with his fiancée in 2018. Jan was an investigative journalist that was investigating corrupt oligarchs, and they basically found out that they could not bribe him. He was good at his work, and he was, on the edge of revealing interesting really shook the whole society. And it proved two things. It proved us that, we cannot let such attacks, which eventually begin with disinformation campaigns, to go further, that we need to protect our journalists, because it's their right. They serve a purpose of being a watchdog of society, of questioning the, not popular questions to public institutions, public representatives. The second, being undermined by disinformation, we're letting it. And democracy is not a checklist, and we need to constantly fighting for it. We need to be constantly fighting for the truth that is being attacked on a daily basis, predominantly on social media. Vraž spoke about the impact of disinformation and its geopolitical, scope, and that is so true. When we started to do our work back in 2015, we really saw that majority of the Kremlin is still very much popular, but within the past year, during the pandemic, we saw a rise of Chinese disinformation outlets or Chinese conspiracy theories, especially about the COVID, trying to misdirect the sources of COVID-19, which we still do not know, where did the virus come from. They try to blame the United States for it, of course, but also the US as a source of disinformation has become much more prominent in this region. Alex Jones with his InfoWars became popular and viral with many of Republic, and it took months for Facebook fact checkers to eventually take down such a toxic content that was originally already labeled by American fact checkers as unsuitable to be on these platforms. But since it was translated, it somehow became a new content, and that could have been distributed in our societies, in our languages, in our information bubbles. And that is not okay. Well, what we found out is that even within 1 year within the pandemic, there are still people that believe various conspiracy theories when it comes to COVID. Our latest polling shows that around 30% of population in 10 Central European countries actually think that COVID doesn't exist. Almost 30%, look at how many people have died throughout the past year on COVID. And there are still people who think it's fake. There are still people who, do not want to get vaccinated because of it. This is another impact of disinformation, that in cases of pandemic, believe in conspiracy theories, spread of conspiracy theories and disinformation, especially connected with health issues, can lead to deaths, can be a matter of life and death. And that is not acceptable. We should, ask our representatives, we should ask ourselves what kind of societies we want to live in. We should ask social media platforms to eventually enforce in a similar way their own rules, their own code of conduct, which we as researchers often see is not being equally applied within every single country. Russia, he said that 70,000 posts were being labeled in Serbia. I mean, that's fantastic. But in Slovakia, we have over 1,500 disinformation pages and open Facebook pages and groups that actively spread disinformation on a single day. We have over 200 websites that are labeled and that have been identified as spreading conspiracy theories. And then there's only one fact checker. And I don't mean just one fact checker as an institution, but just one person that serves the role of being a Facebook fact checker in Slovakia, covering the information space of over 3.5 million users that are in Slovakia. And that is just not enough. One person cannot really tackle such amount of disinformation that is already being spread in Slovakia, and one person definitely cannot cover and save the information market, information space of 3.5 million users. Therefore, we should ask social media platforms to invest more into local fact checkers, into local moderators, who will more effectively and efficiently take down disinformation. Disinformation that is connected to COVID and that can really lead to health need to be taken down effectively. We cannot have, videos of Alex Jones going viral, underestimating the trust of medical experts. Which is very, very prominent. 40% of Romanians, according to our latest polls, do not trust doctors and medical experts. And when it comes to vaccination willingness, around 40% of Romanians want to get vaccinated. And that is not the way how we're going to achieve the herd immunity, not only in that particular country, but that is not the way how we're going to fight the pandemic and this virus as the whole society. So we need to ask more of us, not only by fact checking our information, not only being aware what kind of information we share further, but we need to ask more from our public representatives and representatives of social media platforms, because we need to fight for our democracies, and every democracy, no matter how big or small, it's worth fighting for. Thank you very much for your interest. This was my story that I shared today with you. I hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Ms. Klingova, for being part of our conference and sharing your story and everything that you do in regards to combating disinformation and misinformation. Atëherë dëgjuam dy histori mjaft interesante që
We heard two interesting stories that highlighted the necessity for fact-checking. Now, we will take a 15-minute break to come back with a second part of the conference. Stay tuned.
Mra ma herët nuk muj me qit. Mra ma herët nuk muj me qit më masken. Hoj. Veç edhe një panel edhe... Veç një, krejt janë online. Veç moderatori këto.
Mirë shoj.
Përshëndetje dhe ju uroj mirëseardhje të gjithë.
And you that follow us live in the second part of today's conference, DISICON. Now we will have the second panel for today and the last one, and they will discuss about the regional perspective of information integrity. Problems with information integrity are an increasing phenomenon that accompany the industry of modern media. Furthermore, the ever-increasing presence of the citizens in online platforms make the Balkan regions susceptible to information integrity, such as disinformation and misinformation. This panel will present findings and the main trends of the reports of monitoring reports from Albania, Serbia, North Macedonia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Montenegro. In fact, we will discuss more and we will try to find answers as to how fact-checking community can help. This discussion panel will be moderated and facilitated by colleague Miodrag Milicevic, who is Executive Director of NGO Active. Milicevic has almost over 2 decades of experience in national, regional issues, knowledge on elections, institution building, and civil society.
Milita, dobar dan, good afternoon. Ja ću danas pričati na...
I will speak in my native language, and I insisted that today's panel I should open it in a local language, given that we have composition of the panel and having in mind, in general, our multi-ethnic environment and what we are trying to advocate for today in this public space. So today it is my honor, and primarily I would like to thank the organizers, of course, NDI, for the invitation to moderate today's panel, including the information that I hope will be relevant not only for us here in this area, but for all our colleagues and others who will join us through different platforms, online platforms, and social networks. Before we call our panelists, I would like to tell you a few technical information in relation to communication and all that we expect today in form of interaction with participants. So today's conference, as others, is in hybrid format, and this is how it's going to be held. Uh, what is also important in essence is besides Zoom platform, this conference and this panel will be broadcasted through YouTube channel and other local media. What is important also for all those who get involved through Zoom, interpretation is provided in three languages: English, Albanian, and Serbian. This also applies for YouTube channel, where you can follow also as well as through Zoom. What is also important to emphasize is that today's panel will last for some 70 minutes, very interactive, intense, and in that regard, we will try to be concise, and to be directed towards the objective of this discussion, to transfer what is important, which is the information of the importance information disorder that we are witness of and that appear in our media space. Furthermore, these are technical details that I wanted to share with you. All those who have a question or want to in some way get involved in discussion through Zoom platform, they can ask a question, and we will pass it on to our panelists during the discussion. What is also important is the topic that we are processing today: information disorder, namely how to secure integrity of information, and what is the perspective about that on the regional level, and how the fact-checking community in general can intervene, and how it should intervene in this public space. We are witnesses that we have one flood influx of information that appear in public spectra, that distorts the image, and about how misinformation are being spread, and namely uh, many other false information that are spread through different platforms, misleading information, and so on. What concerns us mostly is the long-term effects of campaigns of public disinformation that are created to cause high degree of mistrust and confusion and current societal space. Yesterday, we had an opportunity to learn more from the report that was presented, research that was presented by the NDI, and that is namely uh, uh, based on surveys. 70% of population in Kosovo believe that portals regularly or occasionally report information distortion. Up to 30% of these narratives, information that are provided through these web portals, is considered to be fake or partly or fully distorted. And this is a high degree percentage, and this fits within the perspective of what is today called information distortion. and disorder, and what I will discuss about today, and what I will emphasize with our panelists, and what I will try to gain regional perspective. Why is this happening? What are the issues that appear in this media space, and how, in general, as a community, should intervene in relation to some of those. Within this panel, some will be presented as main findings and trends of the reports of following media in North Macedonia, Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, and Albania. With today's panelists, I will discuss about challenges in media environment in their countries, to compare practices in fighting misinformation, and joint approach to sustain the integrity of this information. Without further ado, I would like to use this opportunity to announce our panelists today. Number one, Madam Maria Vucic, a journalist of Greek, and most prominent, I would like to add, she is one of the most prominent, this is one of the most prominent and most important platforms in Serbia fighting against different uh, types of media disorder. Milica Zrnovic is also with us, coordinator and researcher of the Center for Monitoring and Research in Podgorica. Then Filip Stojanovic is with us from Foundation Metamorphosis from North Macedonia. And with particular pleasure, I will announce another two panelists: Dario Jovanovic, director of the Project for Free and Fair Elections in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Kristina Boko, executive director of BIRN in Albania. I would like to welcome you all, and at the beginning, I want to check with all of you what is, and whether in your countries there is a community, fact-checking community, if there is a fact-checking community in your countries. Let's start from Maria Vucic, and I would like to hear what is the situation in Serbia given the exchange information and data, what appears in media, and very often some general basic social networks and traditional media as well.
To speak in English, if that's okay with you. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Maria Vucic, and I work as a journalist for Crime and Corruption Reporting Network, KRIK, which is an investigative website from Serbia. And specifically, I work for our newly launched, but it's not that new because we launched this fact-checking debunking website 4 years ago, called raskrikavanje.rs. So it was launched 4 years ago because we actually realized that we need, in Serbia, we need some platform to debunk and to fight all sorts of media manipulations. So this is what we do on a daily basis. We find and debunk fake news in other media articles in Serbia. We find fake news, propaganda, misinformation, manipulation with facts, etc. Something like maybe Snopes. So my job is half like journalistic, half fact-checking job. And my everyday job is basically to find media manipulation, some suspicious claim, and to fact-check it and to debunk. The situation in Serbia regarding fake news and propaganda seems maybe a bit complicated if you're living abroad. But given the number of media existing in Serbia, we have dozens of nationally distributed newspapers and nationally distributed TV stations, which are broadcasted nationally, and we have over 2,000 online media outlets. So it's a bit chaotic. You would say that we have a media pluralism since we have that number of different media. We have media pluralism and different opinions debating in this public space, but the truth is much more darker, unfortunately, and actually very simple. It's pretty much black and white situation in Serbia. You have one propaganda machinery on one side, the richest, the most watched, most popular media that basically work for the government, and on the other hand, you have small number of independent media that exist almost exclusively online. So most read and most watched media outlets that have major reach to people who are mostly offline, who do not use internet, and who are the most active voters, basically. Most of those media are actually pro-governmental. They work for the government in this or that way. You have there is one or few oppositional newspapers, no critical national TV station. We have few TV stations that are critical towards the government, but they exist only on cable network, which is not so popular here in Serbia. People are still stuck with all traditional TV stations. So in spite of the fact that there are over 2,000 online outlets in Serbia, most of them are like PR departments for the local governments, different local governments, or the national government, which provides them actually financial support from local and state funds. So it's a business actually. It's political and business influence over media, and the only small space for critics and free journalism and truthful journalism is actually online. So I'm counting I think that my media outlets that I work for are one of few pearls in this media mud we live in Serbia. So it's KRIK, Raskrinkavanje, Center for Investigative Journalism of Serbia, Bulk Investigative Reporting Network, few local online media, etc., which provide most of their finances from foreign funds, from foreign donors. That actually provides us editorial independence and the possibility actually to work freely and without any pressure from politicians, from business sector, etc. But beyond us, there is a huge, as I said before, huge propaganda and lying fake news machinery supported directly or indirectly by people in power, either on local or national level. And this is actually, this machinery is what we fight against every single day. Not only my website, Raskrinkavanje, but also a few other small online outlets that fight propaganda and fake news. It's basically one, I would say, David against Goliath fight. And just to put things in perspective, according to our analysis, for the last year, 2020, we counted that 5 major newspapers in Serbia, which are tabloids, the most powerful, they have the biggest reach, and they have the biggest amount of money disposable, and they have a support by the regime. They published over almost actually 1,200 fake news or other media manipulations only in front pages. So we have actually over 1,000 fake news and media manipulations in a year, screaming from front pages of the most popular newspapers. So just if you could gain a picture of what we are fighting against, and I believe that situation is similar across the region. I don't want to sound too pessimistic, and I know I do, because my impression is that in these 4 years, we actually managed, maybe it's my impression, maybe it's I don't have any statistics, but I think that I'm observing people on social media and their reactions to our articles. I think that we may be doing our fact-checking job. Maybe we managed to raise a little bit of awareness and media literacy level among our readers. It's important to actually document all sorts of media manipulations or obvious lies, just to have proofs that we are not just talking into thin air. We are just talking the same story over and over again. They're lying, etc. Now we have documented. We have a lot of evidence that they are lying, and I mean, by them, I mean major media outlets. We monitor. They are lying systematically and every day, and they have at the same time a huge support by the government. So I believe that the fake news in Serbia is actually a governmental project in a way, because it's very it's actively supported by the government that is using our money, taxpayers' money, to give in this or that way to those media financial support, and in that way actually providing them with secure future and secure basis for them to lie in the future even more. So that would be it for the beginning. If you have any questions, I would be glad to answer.
Well, you're still with us in the air. In the essence, I wanted to ask you, from where such need of the authority of the government to spread so much misinformation, fake news? As you said, we had influx of, as you said, 5,000 fake news throughout the year that are in the air.
I will talk in Serbian now because
and it is not 5,000, it's 1,200 fake news on cover pages. It's also on 5 tabloids and 5 newspapers. Where is this need coming from? Well, I would say that the government is aware of the power that media have. I think that the government, such government, in this historical moment and context, would not be able to survive without a serious picture that it is building about itself. And I would say that unfortunately this propaganda is successful in this region because we are still not well emancipated from the heritage of the past. Well, where there were not many critical voices in the past. Media, often in different ages, in different historical periods, served as propaganda tools. We are still dealing with with the heritage of 1990s, where radio television of Serbia was extended arm of Milosevic's regime. We remember all these media crimes from that time, and this heritage where people still don't expect that someone will provide them information, objective information, but let me tell me what to think, who is good, who is bad. And this guy from the authority is good, he's constructing roads, he's taking care of our GDP. Our GDP is growing, our numbers are growing, we are the best. And those from opposition, they are criminals, murderers, and so on and so forth. This is the simplified image that media provide us, that is acceptable to people here who are unfortunately they have a low level of media literacy. And I think this need of the authority to control media is no surprise, not surprising. We are not special in any way. There is a tendency of all our governments and authorities in this world to control the flow of information, but in our case this seems even worse than, let's say, in Scandinavia, where media have the awareness that they are sort of fourth pillar of the authority, guardian of public interest. But here, media are in Serbia are dependent from the state funds, from financial support, political influence. And if you are critical towards the authority, then you will have problems with those who advertise in newspapers. They will withdraw, and you will have no resources. Public enterprises that advertise through your media will withdraw all the advertisements, and you will remain on thin ice, so to say. And given the poor economic situation in media, many find it easier to uh, to go as authorities want. Thank you very much. I would like the floor now to Miss or Mrs. Milica Zrnovic to hear what is the situation like in Montenegro. and what is the media image in this region, and to what extent there is fact-checking communities, which Marius was speaking about.
Well, thank you very much, Miodrag, and thank you and Kosovo for inviting Semi to participate today. So I'm Milica, and I'm coordinator and policy researcher from the Center of Monitoring and Research, shortly SEMI. So basically, our organization continues to provide support to reforms and basically for the political system and election monitoring. So when it comes to the media, during the last year parliamentary election, we implemented a social media monitoring project throughout which we actually focus on documenting and identifying online evidences of coordinated inauthentic behavior. So what is the coordinated inauthentic behavior? So that is just the trend that started maybe not started last year, it was also present before, but it was more visible throughout last year elections and also due to coronavirus. So it is defined as a group of pages or people working together to mislead others about who they are and what are they doing. And the people behind this kind of behavior online on social networks, basically on Facebook, Instagram, they create a coordinated network with one another and use also sometimes fake accounts to misrepresent themselves. Throughout this network, they use also, I mean, as I said, fake accounts and to run pages. They usually also change names, admins, and they disseminate content, comments in groups, and also sometimes information that are not fully accurate. And in that way, they are actually, their aim is to artificially increase engagement in targeted countries during elections. So ZEMI is the only CSO in Montenegro that monitors coordinated inauthentic behavior, and that's something we started last year. We actually monitored 51 public entity on Facebook. Those were basically 17 pages, 8 groups, and 26 meme accounts. You probably all know memes accounts, those that let's say classified as dedicated to fun, to satiric, but actually throughout this kind of in that way they try to approach voters in particular way, the younger generation in Montenegro, and try to influence their opinion and also to influence their and bridge their right to free and informed choice. So key findings from our monitoring activities were that during social media, political activity increased 51% on Facebook compared to the period before elections. The suspected network that we identified shared politically motivated content. In many cases, it contained inappropriate, defamatory, and hate speech content. When it was coordinated with certain media outlets, political parties, politicians, and sometimes it was also disinformation propaganda. The network actually, it was very connected. It was densely connected web network with many suspected fake profiles, and some administrators, moderators, and members of also those pages and groups and accounts that we identify are also members of foreign political parties, which suggests that definitely this, let's say, operation on media, specifically social media, are definitely, in that case in Montenegro, they were politically motivated, and there is also foreign actors engagement. So we also, throughout monitoring activities, we developed like whole network, and you can read it on our webpage or the whole report, so I won't go so much in details. However, that this is trending in Montenegro. We proved it as we continue monitoring social media during 2021 elections, actually this year in March. And we have noticed that all those groups that we have been monitoring before, they have been started to be active during elections in 2021. And also that in between, in those periods, electoral periods, their activity on social media was very low. So this data suggests us that the correlation between periods of election campaigns and activity of those accounts on social network is not coincidence. And the more accounts or those accounts that we monitor are created to influence the electoral will of citizens. We went a bit further during the local elections, elections now in 2021, and we started to analyze all of the posts that were on those meme accounts, which are definitely, categorized as fun and for, satiric. But actually that's not true, because 85% of posts they shared were political. So it was just talking about politics, and I think that nowadays there is no person who does not follow some kind of those pages that, it's satiric, it's fun, but every time there is some electoral period, they put some kind of those photos or video that are politically motivated, and only 15% of the things that they post on social media is not political. Definitely we had, and because sometimes they are not so obvious, they try to follow the line not being not political, because also the Ministry of Interior sometimes, if it's too obvious, they try to close those, to delete those accounts if they are breaching some human rights online or offending or some kinds of that. So what I want, that's when it becomes the part of social media, but also semi-monitored, we monitor traditional and electronic media. So when it comes to that, we have noticed a lot of foreign influence during local elections in Nikšić in 2021. So those were just local election, but according to the media, they had a regional significance. Which was actually confirmed by the reporting of regional media and attention they dedicated to this topic. In particular, there was a dominant foreign presence in influence of the media outlets from Serbia. So Serbian portals rarely reported in a neutral tone. So according to our analysis, it was 87.6% of the articles had the tone that was directed positively or negatively towards electoral list. And usually if they have this positive tone they had positive tone toward the new government, while always negative toward the old one. So the current opposition. So it's definitely some kind of propaganda that's been going on through media. It is also, we could connect it with that they had also, they were been involved in spreading some kind of disinformation, because we noticed a large amount of spin information identified throughout incomplete articles with sensationalist headlines, like clickable headlines, photographs, but sometimes without broader description of the event, without stating who is the resource of those news. In that way, they attempt to influence political opinions of the citizens during elections. So yeah, the main challenges in Montenegro when it comes to media is definitely, first of all, because social media is not, as such, is not defined by the law. So there is no any kind of regulation, and definitely I would agree with my colleagues who previously said that the power of media and actually politicians and political parties do know what is the power of media, so they try to use it in their favor as much as they can to get their, for their own interests, to get more votes. So yeah, I'm looking forward to, I will stop here. I don't know if I took much of time, and then we further can discuss.
Thank you very much for this extensive feedback related to media environment in Montenegro, and here I would like to make a comparison with what is going on in North Macedonia, and to see what is going on there, and what are the impressions about the expansion. Not to say disinformation, spreading of misinformation, but distorted, not only through information, not only through traditional media, but through social media. What is the situation like with you in Northern Macedonia?
Hi, thank you for inviting us, and warm greetings from Skopje to everyone. Well, I'm Filip Stanovski. I come from Metamorphosis Foundation, which is the first organization that introduced fact-checking in North Macedonia. It was in 2011, when together with several other organizations from the region, we realized that it's a big problem that both the political discourse and wider society has been influenced by misinformation, and by introducing the first fact-checking service in the country called the Truth Meter, we joined several other organizations from the region, notably CERTA from Serbia, which was the first, then Why Not from Bosnia, and CDT from Montenegro, in establishing such basically not only our national service focused on our country and keeping politicians accountable, but also developing a network that was that led to a lot of activities related to accountability and using new technologies in the region, including the annual point conferences, which are held in Bosnia since then. However, in 2012, we realized that we need to take care to tackle the issue of misinformation produced by the media and the behavior of media in general. So we started the media fact-checking service that year. It was the first in the region, and later several other organizations opened such fact-checking services. So not focused on the political actors, but on the behavior of media. Our methodology was based on Code of Journalists and still is. And however, we realized over the years, because we had a very similar situation until 2017, like in Serbia, where the dominant political party was controlling most of the media space, that we need more than just fact-checking. So we also focused on development of relations with the mainstream media outlets and introducing fact-checking as a component of the mainstream media outlets, including the media outlets that we have founded at the time, Meta.mk news agency and Portal.mk, which is a news portal in Albanian language. In 2018, we also started another activity which is in synergy with all these activities, which is the combining of media literacy education and critical thinking education through an EU-supported project called Critical Thinking for Media-Wise Citizens, or crithink.mk. And this also included capacity building and networking with civil society organizations and local media, enabling them to become part of this whole media literacy / fact-checking community, because fact-checking is part of media literacy, and we consider it as such. In the meantime, we became members of the International Fact-Checking Network, which was founded by all these fact-checking organizations all around the world. And also, we started different networking activities both at national level. So for instance, starting with very simple, allowing media outlets in the country and encouraging them to republish our content in the local languages, in Macedonian and Albanian, but also strengthening the ties with other fact-checking organizations from the region, founding different networks, including the Action C network and anti-disinformation network for the Balkans last year, which does not only include fact checkers, but also other media organizations, because again, this is not only about fact checking, fighting disinformation. We were told that this session will be about trends. So I will share a little bit of our experience in North Macedonia, because when we hear about Serbia, it's usually that I have a feeling of that, oh, this is so several years ago, because what we had as a state capture situation in North Macedonia seems to repeat itself in Serbia at a much larger scale now, unfortunately. And so we can tell us that some of the issues that are prevalent at this moment will not go away, even if the government changes and pro-democracy or pro-European political forces come into power. This is because the established propaganda networks, which are related to the to these various populist political parties who also drain the public coffers for that, they don't go away. They have accumulated a lot of money already, and they also have different suspicious sources of funding, including through Hungary, which keep them going. Another thing that is a factor is that established troll networks, which we have some indications, thanks to the investigative reporters, were helped to be established by some Russian operatives back in 2015. OCCRP made a research about it. They continue to function, and they support both local causes related to elections, referendums, and actions related to the interest of these right-wing populist parties and centers of power, but also at times they serve as vehicles of Russian influence. Especially, it is interesting recently because of the dispute between Bulgaria and North Macedonia, to notice that even public diplomacy has switched to Twitter, where there is big support for, let's say, pro-Kremlin narratives or narratives that promote discord in society and anti-Western narratives, thanks to these established troll networks of local political parties. Part of the context is also, like everywhere else in the region, I presume, the low level of education in general, and including what we found out with one of our research activities, the low level of education of media workers, because not all media workers who run hundreds and thousands of websites possibly are educated as journalists, nor they adopt the standards of journalistic profession. Our recent research from last year showed that around 96% of interviewed journalists think that they need, or their colleagues need, a regular upgrading of knowledge and capacity for media literacy. So we have those who are media professionals, who should be the first barrier against disinformation, who should check the facts as part of their daily work, are those who are also in need of media literacy education, because it has really not been part of the educational system in the last 30 years and more. Another aspect that we investigated is the susceptibility of the population to different types of disinformation, including conspiracy theories. One of our critic research activities was to ascertain this aspect, and it showed that over 60% of surveyed citizens are susceptible to conspiracy theories. They subscribe to at least one of generally accepted conspiracy theories related to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Philip, if I may interrupt you for a sec. A question, because you all actually forced me to speak English. Actually, I really wanted you, actually, and other colleagues and the panelists basically to address in your native language. Anyways, we may continue in English. And my question to you, very briefly, if you would be able actually to compare 2017 with nowadays situation in your country, is the thing really getting better, or it is the same or worse at this point of time?
Oh, of course. There are big changes that have happened, but they have not solved all the problems that are pertinent to the disinformation sphere. The government has instituted several, let's say, practices and changes in the work of the institutions, including one very major issue of basically the government made a decree that forbid state institutions to invest money in media campaigns and to pay money directly to private media, which was a big source of media corruption before. Many of the aspects of that were plaguing the freedom of expression in previous years have not been present, those who stem from the government, because there has been no really direct pressure against the media, and in the sense that was done during the period of state capture. The government has become more transparent, more open to media inquiries, including from pro-opposition media currently, and reacting also to many of the citizen initiatives on social media, including initiatives that have led to firing or resignations of high government officials, or even investigations about corruption, which was not the case in the past. So the situation is definitely much different than before, but still there are many problems that remain. First, because there is still the democratic reforms that were supposed to happen have not been completed, both in the sphere of legislation, where many of them are blocked by the opposition in parliament, and also the reform of the judiciary has been very slow, and that has led to impunity for hate speech, for many types of damaging activities related to disinformation and media abuse, but also, for instance, even related to disinformation about the pandemic, which is covered by the criminal code. Otherwise, in North Macedonia, there are no laws that you can use to limit the spread of false news content or false information. Even with the pandemic, there have been a lot of they call themselves alternative medicines or other profiteers who try to exploit the suffering of the people by selling fake medicines or some superstition services. And even if they're blatantly, how can I say, false, the state does not have a mechanism to move against them. Only in the case of a lawsuit for swindling, if money has been exchanged, then the police can intervene. Otherwise, it has been very troublesome to use the legal mechanisms in this disinformation sphere. First, because the government is very cautious. They don't want to appear as the previous government, because the pro-opposition media are already blaming them for the same ills that the previous parties have been doing, and also because there is a big pressure from the media community to not to overregulate, but to focus on support for self-regulation within the media community. However, as I said, maybe there are many media outlets, especially online media, who are not really part of the ethical journalism sphere, if you can put that like that, and they don't care for the self-regulation mechanisms, even if they have been found out to be wrong or misleading by the press council, it does not affect their bottom line. So we are looking also for other ways to address this. One big factor that has been since last year is cooperation with Facebook. We became part of the Facebook third-party fact-checking partnership, and it has really had a big effect because as previous speakers, both on these sessions and before, said, especially our colleague from Czech Republic, there is a big confluence between political and commercially motivated disinformation. The commercially motivated disinformation also reaches out to cybersecurity issues such as promoting, let's say, phishing websites and things like that by using disinformation and basically stealing people's money. So there is a whole range of media who profit from sensationalist or fake clickbait. And also there is illegal economy on Facebook of people who build up pages and then sell them, which is illegal, or sell the data of their...
Apologies. I would like to stop here for a second. I would like to give an opportunity to Dario and Christina to make a clear cut about of this part and to see in essence what's the situation like in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'm glad to hear that there is some advancement in North Macedonia, which is a good positive thing. And I would like to ask Dario to share Bosnia and Herzegovina experiences with us, and then Christina with some specific questions. Dario?
Well, hello to everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Regarding your question, we have community dealing with fact-checking in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I come from Podlupom, which is actually a local observation group, and we have worked on the election observation from 2014. Back in 2018, we worked with the support of NDI in context of foreign powers relations and roles in elections regarding disinformation. And this is already almost 2.5 years old thing that we have done, but also as part of our observation methodology that actually we are also exporting to other countries. We have media context questions, of course, and including the questions on the biased media reporting. So we have some statistics and some trends which are actually increasing regarding biased media reporting in last election cycles, or from the election cycle to election cycle. But we also have other organizations dealing with disinformation more detail and fact-checking on daily basis in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and one of them was mentioned by Philip. It is Association Why Not, which are actually leading the portal raskrinkavanje.ba or .ba here in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I will just shortly reflect. I would like to, if we would have space or time for discussion, disinformation is not new concept on this area. I think disinformation are just more accessible, visible, and diversified than before. And of course, it is more obvious to recognize them. I always speak of my parents who used one channel or two channels, which are both state channels in former Yugoslavia, and they did not know of other truths and had no other channels or other sources of information. And I cannot blame them for today having such a poetic and perfect vision of this country, especially because they were young and have a lot of beautiful memories there. But of course, we always had, especially government attempts to control media and to send disinformation. Just we maybe were not aware that that government is lying to us. And now it is not only government, we have multiple others, actors which are ready to mislead us or lie to us in order to fulfill some of their interests. This is really sensitive to speak about this information because this discussion always opens some kind of the other dimensions. I would say, you know, information or communication is not the exact science, and transferring the messages is not that we will hear the same messages and understand the same messages the same as individuals. So it is more of interpretation, and many of these are actually using this interpretation or choosing a certain parts of the communication narratives or facts in order to present us something from different angles, from different positions, which is becoming more and more present. And when you have to stick to something in order to prove your narrative or to prove your point, then it is more willingness to believe in some kind of the disinformation narrative. Of course, disinformation is used as a political tool, and that is not only in Bosnia. I always mentioning that, for example, in case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, 70% of our out-of-country economy is connected to the European Union, 20% to the region, 10% to the all other countries worldwide. But when we have some kind of the political figures which are in favor of some other countries, then we have some of the really pity in comparison to others. For example, donations or investments being presented as the biggest one in the country, especially those who are coming from Russia, China, or Turkey, for example, because these ethno-nationalistic parties which are in power for more than 30 years in Bosnia and Herzegovina are actually connected to one of those. So it is a big discussion in Bosnia and Herzegovina, of course, worldwide, about the other things, also the critics toward disinformation, when it crossed line of the critics toward media and editor's choice, the state regulation, whether it is good or not, because they then can over-regulate freedom of speech and similar, and others. I just want to maybe present some information from Bosnia in context of disinformation. There's a flood of or overflooding of false media, of course, with no impressum, with no accountability for the words spoken, no source, unnamed sources, no journalists at all, sensationalisms. And some of them are actually using it like to present certain foreign powers, positive or negative. Some of them are using it for promotion or propaganda of government. But we also have many of these actually manipulating with information in order to attract people to come to their side just for the one simple reason, and it may seem stupid, it is Google ads profit. So regarding this, some statistics from Bosnia and Herzegovina, we have the least neutral reporting in the media in Bosnia and Herzegovina. By our research from 2018, between 19 and 24 of the total articles 24%, 19 and 24% of the total articles we analyzed more than 4,400 of them, had some kind of a neutral approach in presenting the story, which means that they used two sides, or they presented some expert opinions, or they took multiple arguments and not taking a side. So it is 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 4 of the articles being actually some kind of the following professional ethics and professionalism in media. Even I'm not a media person or disinformation expert, so I'm always putting reserve on what I'm saying or giving these qualifications. 54% of Bosnia and Herzegovina use media as the primary source of information. 84% of them use TV as the primary source of information. So we love media in Balkans. We love TV, I would say, the most. We also have some other statistics, such as 55% of them never checked source of the news, and 70% of them, or 69% of them to be exact, think that there are false news and false information all over the media content. When you ask them who is responsible to deal with it, 37% of people say it is government. So sometimes when you have the government which is actually building their popularity based on the disinformation narratives, then it is hard to expect to deal with it. So just to conclude, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we like to say that everybody has its own media, and then you have a few independent ones. I cannot say whether it is completely true, but I can say that this curse of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is a consequence of the 90s and the strong ethno-nationalistic division, is also some kind of the bless in media content, because for difference of maybe other ethnically homogeneous communities and communities where you have those people winning elections with, I don't know, 60-70% of the votes and similar, and not having maybe too much plurality in political sense. It is a bless that we always have at least 3 angles on all stories, at least 3 different positions presenting us the same story. It is Croat Bosniak, Croat Catholic, Bosniak Muslim, and Serb Orthodox. And then if you like to get into it and to see all other positions or to have more arguments, it can contribute in some level of your objective opinion creation. But definitely there is a much to do. Maybe we'll have place to speak about it or time to speak about it, but we need, this is my last sentence, we need to learn to live with this information. It will not end up, it will not disappear. It will always be there. And through the education system, monitoring and fact-checking, trusted media, marking, counter narratives, which is really important, even in political sense, media and social networks responsibility, which almost does not exist, you know. We just are seeing now in some modern democracies that are working with social medias around the world to stop some kind of disinformation narratives, or at least to mark it, you know. I think there is a big struggle which will actually be continuous in order to fight something that is all over the place and cannot be cured just like that. Thank you.
Of course, hvala.
Thank you again. Very interesting to hear this from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and very interesting to hear about the foreign influence and something that is a common denominator for the Balkan. This is a tendency of the official governments to control media, media spectre, and to control flow of information. Christian.
From this position, even it seems paradoxal, I'm more happy to live in Bosnia than in Serbia regarding the media content. So,
okay. Very much, thank you. Christina. Your turn basically to hear what's going on in Albania and what is the state of affairs in Albania when it comes to the information disorder and something actually which is related to mainly politicians and the government, you know. Is there a tendency basically of the government to control the flow of information and to perhaps, you know, undermine the influence of the traditional media when it comes to the influence, you know, when it comes to the actually flow of information to a wider citizens and so on?
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share our perspective. And I will take your call to talk in Albanian, in the local language, if I may, because I think I can talk even faster and let the room for the questions later on. So I'll switch in Albanian language. Përshëndetje të gjithëve, faleminderit sërish.
Greetings to everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation to take part in this meeting. My name is Kristina Voko and I represent the BIRN in Albania, which is a local organization for a wider, broader network of organizations that operate in many countries in Balkans. In one way or another, we cooperated with all of you through years. Actually, one small reflection before I answer to your direct question as to what happened with the disinformation in Albania, which as a region we have to share a lot, because while the previous speaker spoke, I found myself in the case of Albania with all examples presented by Maria about the large number of media, most of which are captured by the state. I found myself in the presentation of Milica when she was talking about how politicians control the political discourse during the media campaigns through social networks, and how in Albania we have various attempts of websites, inauthentic websites, to control or to push into the discourse we journey of the fact checkers in the region, and I'm very pleased that now in Albania we can say that we have organized organization dedicated to fact checking, which is part of the network presented by Philip, which is Factory Epical, a 2-year organization, but with a very good job done so far, and hopefully it will multiply in other organizations. But of course, in the speech of Dario, when he was saying how they have big problems with media literacy and the control of audience and public discourse by traditional media. Nevertheless, the biggest news, the best news in Albania comes with the last study published 3 days ago, where recently through a questionnaire developed for the whole Albanian public, for the first time, TV's lost its dominance. But this is not a very good news, though, because on the other hand, we saw for the first time that media were not the most reliable source for the citizens, but were the independent institutions that were competing against media. And of course, government, police continue to be in a very bad position as far as the trust of citizens is concerned. On the other hand, a very disturbing element is the fact that almost 40% of the respondents said that they are informed through social media. And mainly in Albania, we are talking about Facebook. And here I will relate to your question, namely, what is the influence of social networks in Albania and the dominance of politicians in these social networks. Some years ago, when social networks started being used in Albania, all of us, namely independent journalists, activists, social civil societies, thought that there was a great possibility to dominate the public discourse in an equal platform where everybody could have his or her voice. Then, some years further, we see that this platform created more inequality than equality among citizens, activists, journalists. And what we observe, at least in Albania, one of the trends is that the social networks are being dominated by politicians. Contrary to other countries in the region, despite our similarities in Albania, our prime minister has a TV, online TV on Facebook, through which he provides all official information. Through this channel, he justifies the lack of press conference for journalists and failure to answer the questions of a journalist. In addition, what we observed recently, and this not only during the recent elections at the end of April, but also before, the politicians are using social media to distribute the prepared videos which are provided to media, especially those pro-governmental media, without any filter, without any supervision. And this is a very profitable tactics for politicians, because in this way they are not held accountable towards journalists, but through quite sophisticated propaganda, they offer only their own truths. I won't say their lies, because they prefer to say our own truths. And they do not respect any editorial principles and principles of proper journalism. What happened in the recent elections at the end of April, that we followed by using some of the monitoring mechanisms of Facebook, namely CrowdTangle, what we observed was that the entire public discourse through election was not dominated by media, neither traditional nor online media, but they were dominated by the web pages of politicians. I have some figures here that were already published, but let's not forget that only through 3 days, the web pages of candidates for the Albanian parliament reached more than 19 million interactivities, likes, comments, shares, and all of these candidates reached more than 186 million views of their videos that they produced and broadcast in their own social networks by eliminating any presence of theirs in before the professional media, any accountability required from journalists. In Albania, this is a new element. As I said, the prime minister in particular started this uh, some time ago through his online TV. But why is this important? It is because we see how social networks, be in the way they are used by politicians or media, they dominated the discourse very often by distributing disinformation. In the recent and the clearest case was the case of pandemics, where a study of Birn regarding the most clicked, most viewed, most followed news by Albanians during the 8 months of the preceding year, which were the main months of pandemics, indicated that fake news competed with the 20 most followed news published on Facebook. Here we can see that the importance of social networks very often with the problems that we come, namely who has more dominance to finance through advertisements with some unknown algorithm, which are very often non-transparent. They succeed in dominating the public discourse in Albania. Another trend that I would like to highlight for Albania, and I hope that it is not repeated in other countries, is the initiative of the country, of the state, to control. Namely, the government during the recent days continuously, let's say, attacked media by accusing them as distributors of disinformation, with the justification that media are incapable of self-regulating. And from time to time, it took legal initiatives, and Philip mentioned some in Macedonia, legal initiatives to regulate media. Such initiative was a legal package that our government proposed some 2 years ago, and it is still with the parliament, where a public institution, namely Audiovisual Media Authority, would control the authenticity of media, authenticity of information provided by media, and would impose fines which would be impossible to be appealed in court. So these are the trends that we have to be aware of, but on the other hand, we have to reflect as far as our mistakes are concerned. I don't think that disinformation, as highlighted by my colleagues, can be fought only through fact-checking organizations. They play a very significant role, but they are not the only ones. Journalists, if they do their own job in a professional way, of course they do have a very important role. All watchdog organizations which control and publish open data and hold the government accountable, but also media, of course they also have their role in fact-checking. Let's not forget that through media literacy we have to tease the public and the media consumers about their responsibilities for distributing disinformation, responsibility that they have by clicking the clickbait in order to distribute such information even further. And I believe that the better coordination between these groups will better fight the disinformation. And I agree with Darko, disinformation is here, it will remain, it will be sophisticated in its own ways, but we have to be ready to fight it in all possible platforms and the new forms that it will take. Thank you very much.
Christina.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you very much, Christina.
5 minutes. I honestly would like really to ask one quick question to each and one of you, basically outlining a very important thing actually, and I'll start basically from Maria first, basically, and this is about the situation. Of course, there is a common denominator for each of the 5 countries, of course. Maria, I would really kindly ask you in 60 seconds if you can answer basically We all know all of the problems. You outline them basically, and you highlight some of the most significant, of course, disorder of information, etc. If you would be in the position, what exactly would you change actually in terms of the media landscape, for instance, in Serbia?
It is a difficult question. I'm not sure I can provide an answer to that, because I think the change of media landscape depends not only from media but politics. We should economically empower media, and that this political grip will be weaker. On the other hand, how to do it and how to regulate market in this way, how to make the market more favorable for media, this really is beyond my competences. I don't know how I would do it, but on the other hand, I would not to blame, regardless of the economic condition and political conditions. I would not like to blame to put all the responsibility on political and politics and market. Media also have a great deal of responsibility, and their, so how to say, their opportunism, owners of editors of media who don't think about media standards and professional principles, and who, due to some moral flexibility, due to some opportunism and their personal privileges, are ready for major for misconducts towards the public. You are owner of or editor of some media, you know nothing about public interest, or and public interest is not the reason you are in media business. This is only business for you, and for you this is only a way to trade in influence. And I think that media definitely should work on their morale or their professional ethics. And on the other hand, politics should distance itself from the from the media. And on third thing is that the economic situation should improve, and this should be combination. But step by step, I don't know how this should be done. And there is no magic wand to solve all these problems, not only in Serbia but in the region. Milica, what is your opinion in this regard? If you were in position to change something now and immediately, or within a year, what would that be? What you would insist on, which you consider that could change this strange, so to say, media landscape within the region?
This is a bit difficult question. However, I would focus on the recommendation that we do provide and advocate for, and this is definitely the behavior of politicians and political parties on social media and during election, what is allowed, what is not allowed. And I would also agree behavior of the journalists in terms of being more professionals, respecting the principles, personality, and also the behavior of citizens in terms of being more media literate. So those are some kind of maybe changes that we can advocate for, and that maybe could be implemented and can produce some kind of changes in the future. I mean, if you say 1 year, I'm not sure, but definitely regulating somehow behaviors of different actors could be some kind of solution. But definitely I do agree with Maria, it's a bit difficult question, and you cannot have like one standpoint, but it's a problem that all the region is facing. So probably there would be different kind of solutions, but behavior would be, I think, one of them.
Right. Philip, basically there is a certain really improvement in your country, but again, you know, it's a very good, of course, approach, of course, that you collaborate with the Facebook. If there any space, and I perhaps, you know, believe that there is, of course, for advancements basically of the media spectrum, you know, when it comes to the topics actually we discussed today. Just very shortly, briefly, 60 seconds, we are running out of time.
Of course, yes. I think I must note that the study that we did at Metamorphosis in cooperation with Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom, analyzing almost 500 instances of disinformation that have been fact-checked by our teams, showed that really one of the main reasons why people succumb or disseminate or create disinformation is political bias, like party political leaning and other forms of political bias. And I think the departization of society is one of the issues that needs to be at the source of the basically reforms that would lead to a more healthier media sphere and more healthier social media sphere, especially because like in the other countries in the Balkans, the idea is to basically enable a public administration which is objective and professional, free from political party influence at the level of providing the services and all the other normal levels like in the European Union, and also helping the media escape what some of our previous speakers said was also media capture. Indeed, I think there are several things that need to be done, but they have to be done in synergy of all stakeholders. We see, for instance, that the academic community is almost totally absent from the tackling the issue of disinformation. Not only the media, but state institutions have to do their part. The education system at primary, secondary, university level needs to be reformed to mainstream social media literacy, and within it to raise the role of journalism, including fact-checking, because fact-checking is a form of journalism, to the level of what's called in the West the watchdog of public interest, or a power in society, and not the servant of party political centers of power and commercial centers.
Many thanks for that. Of course, Dario, we go quickly to Bosnia and Herzegovina once again. Of course, Dario, do you have any formula, magic formula that could resolve at least, the things in your country? Because we haven't tackled the local media whatsoever today, during our discussion and so on.
Yeah, it is really hard to add anything after Maria, Milica, and Philip. I will just repeat myself probably in good parts of my portion or answer. I think definitely the precondition for everything is something we call political will. Yes, even that should not be a will. It should be sometimes pressure from people or people's will, which will be implemented by the politics. But political will and public to recognize that there is a problem. Greater ethics and professionalism in media, independent institutions who will deal with the independent monitoring, but also potential some kind of the work, educative work with the media, monitoring of other parts of the society, first of all civil society organization, and reporting on these false articles. Some of these solutions are technical, legislation over transparent media ownership, something we don't have in Bosnia, which would be helpful. Obligatory impressum is something that should also maybe be conditioned for the online media to be created. I know it is long period of time being used as a censorship, but now it is maybe can be used as in fight against the false media. Corporations which will pay for the credible news. We saw what was happening in Australia regarding what they transfer. Now it is in our cases is contrary. Media need to pay for their news to be promoted on other media, which is actually social networks. And all these things that are already mentioned, the education system, both for media professionals, but also for general public citizens, fact-checking, trusted media marking, counter-narratives that I mentioned before, and also, as somebody already said, the big portion of responsibility, Maria said, that is also on media. So media need to be responsible for what they publicize, and not only publicize, but also what they transfer. Even if it is a comment from the ordinary citizens, they need to have some kind of the responsibility and accountability what is said, especially if it is hate speech, criminal act or something like that. Yeah.
Okay. Many thanks. Of course, before we conclude today's panel discussion, I would really like to give the floor once again to Christina and to see actually, is there anything that could be done really in your country, what you would really like to see and how you would really intervene in order to mitigate the influence of the political, obviously political groups, of course, that would really to control the public narrative. Very briefly, 60 seconds, and we are just about to conclude today's panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This is the $1 million question that perhaps I will not guess right this time, but I think by educating people, first of all, in media literacy, and the other is by supporting journalists, not the media that sometimes we have seen to be very problematic, but supporting journalists and professional journalism, which seems now to be like a lost professional, not very well respected in all our country because of the attacks from political actors. So perhaps we should go back to the basics and start once again, not to reinvent new forms, but to go back and to start from the basic of journalism, of ethics and professionalism. Thank you.
Many thanks, of course, for that. And I'd like really to thank to each and one of you, first of all, for the great work actually you're doing, you know, within your organizations, the platforms you represent. And I would say also in the end, the community voice, basically, because you're the one basically really representing the community in the interests of each and every single community across the region. With this, of course, I would conclude today's panel discussion. Of course, there is no concrete answer, as you mentioned, there is no magic stick that could resolve all of these pending issues. And the common denominator, you know, which is obviously present across the region and I would say also across the globe. With this, I would really like to conclude today's panel discussion, which is the last panel. I'd hand over actually the floor to our host. And to once again, thanks to the NDI and our colleagues, of course, for giving us the opportunity to be part of your conference, of course, and contribute with our efforts to at least improve or at least to enlighten the entire story about it. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you very much, Mr. Milicevic, for being part of DISICON this year and for facilitating this session. I
would like to thank all the panelists of the last session of our conference that shared with us their experiences and best practices to fight information disorder. Slowly, we reached the end of our conference on information integrity. For a conclusive remarks, I would like to invite the NDI director in Kosovo, Madam Nancy Soderberg.
Well, thank you so much, Adea. And I want to thank all of the wonderful panelist speakers that we had, and just a really robust and insightful 2 days about the challenges of social media in the Balkans region. As we conclude this 2-day conference, let me thank everyone for those who tuned in on Facebook, who were here in person, and a special thanks to USAID for their generous support for this conference, as well as all of our programmatic activity. It's an incredibly valuable partnership for which we are grateful. As Ambassador Koznet said yesterday, many societies are at risk from disinformation, including the United States and Kosovo. What that means is that we all have a role to play here in Kosovo and beyond in protecting vibrant democracy around the world. In Kosovo, that means regulatory officials, the parliament, media, civil society, and all of our citizens. That means first being aware of this growing threat, challenging the source of the information that we read, being aware of our own biases and accepting facts that reinforce our own beliefs, and challenging narratives that are skewed or false. We've seen globally that democracies depend on having reliable, authentic information in order to exercise the democratic rights and responsibilities of our citizenships. The often stated phrase that good information is the oxygen of a thriving democracy is especially true here in Kosovo. Throughout these 2 days, we've learned much from our panelists and our speakers. We've seen how conspiracy theories of COVID-19 are prevalent and believed by much of the population. We have also seen that misogyny is prevalent in the media, and violence against women has gotten worse during this pandemic, increasing pressure on women not to engage in politics. Yet if Kosovo leaves out half of its talent, it cannot thrive as a democracy. We've also seen that disinformation is particularly dangerous to people and communities with underlying vulnerabilities. All of what we've learned in these last 2 days means that we must commit to building a resilient society to combat the growing threat of disinformation, to look at the sources of information, how is it disseminated, who are the targets, and decide to stand up to falsehoods and demand accountability. We heard about the role of the user in creating an adequate information system around them. And as we just heard, stick to the basics. We at NDI are committed to working with our partners across Kosovo, in government, in media, in civil society, and the population in general to fight this threat. We look forward to following up with all of you on implementing the lessons learned from this conference. And thank you to Team Kosovo for the hard work in making this conference a success, from Valan to Paikem, Nikola, Adea, Besard, Ardian, Nenad, Erna, Chandresa, and Zaina. Thank you all. I want to also thank the incredible tech team for making the magic happen, our wonderful translators so that we could all follow no matter what the language was. It's a team effort, and thank you so much. Mostly thank you to all of our panelists who participated online and in person. And again, thank you to USAID for making this conference and our programmatic activities possible. Thank you again, and see you at the next DISICON.